If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 99 Decision 1. Former Ministry of Magic, now Clock Tower Parliamentary Hall. The Parliamentary Hall was an enormous room supported by gigantic Greek pillars, the ceiling divinely painted with a grand artwork depicting the creation of the origins of magic. The floor was so clean it could easily serve as a mirror. In the center of the hall, there was an imposing black rectangular table with 24 seats, at least 18 of which were occupied by witches and wizards. At the far end of the hall, elevated by numerous steps on a flat platform, there were 12 seats resembling thrones. This is an insult from those damn French. Vincent Parkinson, Patriarch of House Parkinson, Lord of the Department of Creation, slammed his fist against the table and spoke with an extremely irritated tone. He was not the only one who was extremely irritated. Whether lord or senator, regardless of who they were, they all displayed dark expressions. The reason for the anger was obvious: a letter sent by the French delegation moments ago, which everyone present had read and were furious about. "Why don't we return to the 100 Years' War?" Bartholomew Crouch proposed with a cold, deadly look. His proposal made at least 4 senators agree with the suggestion to go to war. If you looked closely, you would see that all 4 senators belonged to a faction, the same one he was part of. "Do not let anger cloud your judgment, Your Excellency. We just came out of a civil war 6 months ago, we definitely don't want to enter another war at this moment." The people would be furious with the clock tower. Aurelius Greengrass, Patriarch of House Greengrass, Lord of the Department of Botany, spoke, calming everyone. Yes, it had been 6 months since the Civil War had ended and everything had returned to normal without many changes. The only change was that the Ministry of Magic had been successfully dissolved and the clock tower had risen as the supreme governing body in England. In these 6 months, regardless of which faction you belonged to, everyone joined together to maintain order and heal the wounds of the Civil War. Thus, in these 6 months that had passed, England had reached its peak with a cohesion rarely seen in centuries in this country. "I apologize, Lord." Bartholomew sat down in his chair, a bit disheartened, and responded in a slightly lower and tired voice. No one spoke against the old patriarch of House Crouch. Everyone knew that the man had lost everything in the 13-Year War, and even more in this civil war, where his only descendant, who was a Death Eater, was killed, leading to the near extinction of House Crouch. "We all understand that you want to vent your anger, Your Excellency," Aurelius said in a calm tone, shifting his gaze to the others present. "How do you think we should respond to the letters from the French Ministry of Magic?" Asterion, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke, "Let's accept the proposal." Seated in the Lord of the Department of Curses seat, Asterion captured everyone's attention in the parliamentary hall. "Everyone must be wondering why we should accept the French proposal," he said, remaining indifferent to the curious glances. "We must accept, and not only accept but also host the Tri-Wizard tournament in our country. We need to show our strength, despite the grudge we hold against the French wizards. Especially now, having just emerged from a civil war, people need a joyful event to completely dispel the shadow of war." Asterion finished his speech and took a sip of tea, maintaining a calm and composed gaze over the parliamentary hall. Due to the low number of parliamentarians and lords, the 3 factions had fragmented, and power was decentralized and reorganized in a way that accommodated everyone. The pure-blood faction transformed into the aristocratic faction and became the most powerful in Parliament, with 5 lords: Black, Greengrass, Parkinson, Macmillan, and Malfoy. All were involved in some way with House Black. The neutral faction, after House Greengrass left as the leader, weakened considerably, with only 3 lords remaining in Parliament: Morgan, Foley, and Beck. The light faction reorganized as the Democratic faction, becoming the second most powerful in Parliament, with 4 lords: Abbott, Ollivander, and 2 members of Muggle descent. This alleviated the few remaining great noble houses after the Civil War, where 7 great noble houses, which laid the foundations of British wizarding society, were officially considered extinct. Along with the great houses that became extinct in the war 13 years ago, more than half of the Sacred 28 disappeared in less than 2 decades. It's worth noting that Lucius Malfoy was imprisoned in Azkaban after the war and succeeded by his eldest son, Draco Malfoy. However, due to his young age, the Lord seat of House Malfoy was under the regency of House Black until Draco was old enough to inherit the Lord seat in Parliament. As for Asterion, almost 14 years old, seated in the Lord's seat, no one present in that hall considered Asterion a child. Besides being a special grade wizard, the boy had killed the most terrible Dark Lord who had set foot on this island. After hearing Asterion's words, everyone remained silent. They knew that Lord Black was right, but the ingrained prejudice of the English against the French was not something easy to resolve, especially considering that France had sent elite wizards to join the civil war on Voldemort's side. This had made the relationship between the two nations even more tense than it already was, almost seeming as if the 100 Years' War was on the horizon, about to explode at any moment. Someone just needed a match, and the gasoline would do the job of starting the conflict between the two nations. Seeing everyone still silent, reluctant to accept the proposal, Asterion placed the teacup on the table and spoke again. Instead of a Triwizard tournament, why don't we change it? Let's create an international magic tournament, invite neighboring countries, and crush those pompous, arrogant, candy-addicted blondes in front of other nations. Asterion's words caused everyone's faces to brighten. The idea of crushing the arrogant French fools in front of other nations was quite tempting for them. After a brief silence, Asterion spoke again. All in favor, raise your hand. Immediately after, the Black Heir raised his hand in support, followed by the entire aristocratic faction who stood behind their leader. After a palpable hesitation in the air, the remaining 4 lords present raised their hands, expressing their support for the proposal. 90% of the senators also raised their hands, thus deciding in favor. The first international magic and witchcraft tournament would be held in England. Chapter 100 Decision 2. When the doors of the Parliament opened, Aurelius Greengrass walked alongside his son-in-law. "What did you think of the parliamentary meeting?" he asked, looking at the group of senators ahead of them. It was Asterion's first time attending a parliamentary meeting since Arcturus had fully retired, passing the lordship to his great-grandson. Though Asterion had not yet inherited the patriarchal mantle and taken over the House of Black as patriarch, a moment that would only come upon Arcturus passing, according to the Salic laws governing England's inheritance laws. "They seem strangely united, despite the contradictions among them," commented Asterion, spinning the ring on his finger. The ring's body was composed of 2 snakes, one silver and the other golden, with a beautiful black diamond held between their heads. Anyone familiar with the history of House Gaunt would recognize this same diamond in the ring of each Gaunt patriarch. Yes, when faced with a common enemy, it's not uncommon to see us all collaborating with each other. After all, while hatred may be enduring, only interests are eternal, Aurelius replied with a low chuckle, adjusting his cane. His blue eyes, reminiscent of Daphne's, fixed Asterion with a peculiar gaze, almost as if he were looking at a son he never had. Honestly, to Aurelius' eyes, it wasn't much different. He had always wanted a son to inherit his legacy, and though he never had one, he gained one through his daughter's marriage. Asterion understood the reasoning. Interests always came before everything else in the eyes of those in power. It was normal, akin to taking a cherished friend's job. There was nothing personal about it, just business. "You need to be prepared, Asterion. We'll likely want you as the new face of England, so you'll need to greet all the guests coming for the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft," Aurelius continued, his voice calm and serene as they walked. Asterion nodded. Aurelius' words didn't surprise him. After killing Voldemort in front of everyone, his fame in England had arguably surpassed Rose's. Thus, it wasn't surprising that he would be the one greeting all foreign guests in the country. It was both a show of respect to other countries and a subtle demonstration of strength. It might seem somewhat childish to some, but that's how international politics worked. Those with the bigger cannon were the most powerful. Simple and straightforward. Aurelius and Asterion ascended the clock tower via the elevator that led to the street and entered a car. The car soon glided silently through the streets of London. Inside the car, Aurelius placed his cane beside him and his hat on the seat beside it. He looked at his son-in-law with a smile on his face as he crossed his legs. "So, when will your wedding with Daphne be?" he asked gently. Asterion widened his eyes, completely taken aback by Patriarch Greengrass's question. "Don't look at me like that, my wife Helena is more eager than I am for this wedding to happen." Aurelius chuckled and looked at Asterion's shocked face. It was the first time he had seen such an expression on his son-in-law's face. "We're very young, maybe when we turn 18 or 20. Recovering from the surprise, Asterion shook his head and replied uncertainly. Aurelius's question had indeed caught him off guard this time. Aurelius shook his head and asked, "How old do you think I am, Asterion? 30 or 33? Looking at the youthful face of the Greengrass family patriarch, Asterion calmly responded. "I'm glad you think I'm that young, but I'll be turning 51 by the end of the year." With a playful smile on his lips, Aurelius corrected his son-in-law in a friendly tone. He continued speaking calmly. "Wizards are different from muggles, we have a lot of difficulty reproducing naturally, which is one of the reasons there are so few wizards in the world. Helena became pregnant with Daphne when she was 37, despite trying hard to conceive for nearly 15 years. When I received the news that she was pregnant, I was over the moon with excitement. My waist could finally rest. Aurelius showed a nostalgic and bitter look on his face as he continued to speak. This kind of thing is quite common in our world. Fleamont and Euphemia Potter were a good example of this. They only had children when they were elderly and didn't even live to see their son grow up and get married. Asterion fell silent at Aurelius's words. He knew that fertility issues were a serious matter among the noble houses, but marrying so early wasn't in his plans at the moment. Not that he was reluctant to marry Daphne in the first place, but he simply felt the timing wasn't right. After all, they were both 13, not yet 14. I'll talk to Daphne about it. Asterion definitely couldn't say what he was thinking, especially to his father-in-law, so that's all he could say for now. The rest of the journey continued in silence, but not an awkward silence, as both were reading some reports, until finally the trip ended. The car parked in front of the green grass mansion. Try talking to Daphne about marriage, Asterion. The door was opened by the driver, but before getting out of the car, Aurelius spoke again with a friendly smile. Asterion could only nod and watch his father-in-law enter the mansion, letting out a relieved sigh. This conversation about marriage had left him quite weary, something he hoped he would never have to deal with. Nolan, let's head to the Black Mansion. Looking at the driver, Asterion leaned back in the rear seat and spoke with his eyes closed. Arriving at the mansion, Asterion entered while loosening his tie around his neck and walked into the living room. To his surprise, he found Narcissa sitting on the sofa reading a newspaper, which made him look at her with a strange gaze. It was the first time Asterion had seen her reading the newspaper in years. Did something important happen? Lying down on the sofa, he rested his head on Narcissa's thighs and casually asked, placing his arm over his eyes. To his surprise, his cousin actually responded with a serious tone. Yes. Something really significant happened, she said, handing the newspaper to Asterion. Sitting up, he took the newspaper and opened it to the page Narcissa indicated, widening his eyes as he looked at the article. On this Monday, France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Spain, and Portugal suffered massive attacks on their respective ministries of magic. The reasons behind the Dark Lord's reprisals are still unknown, but according to sources, nearly 3,000 wizards and witches lost their lives in a single day. Since the Middle Ages, this is the highest number of wizarding deaths recorded in nearly 6 centuries. Grindelwald is finally spreading his terror across the European continent. At this moment, protests are occurring in various European countries, with the population demanding the Dark Lord's arrest and death sentence. Grindelwald's plan has officially begun. This was Asterion's only thought after reading the articles in the newspaper. Though he didn't exactly know what Gellert Grindelwald's plan entailed, he knew it was far from simple, much like his plan to create a god or Mustafa's plan to reach the root of all magic. The world is becoming increasingly mad, Asterion murmured to himself, his eyes intensely serious yet calm. The staircase appeared, but few would have the courage to climb its steps. Chapter 101 Decision, 3. Asterion finally understood why France had sent such a sudden invitation to host a Triwizard tournament. It was likely an excuse to create a coalition against Grindelwald. For this, England was essential, not just because of Dumbledore, but because of himself, recognized as a powerful wizard of special rank after killing Voldemort. Displaying a malicious smile, Asterion had already thought of numerous ways to blackmail the French government. After all, if they wanted him to work, they had to pay, and pay very well. He was a lion, and France was a succulent steak ready to be devoured at any moment. Seeing Asterion with a malicious smile, Narcissa rolled her eyes. Her dear cousin looked like a villain, orchestrating nefarious plans with that characteristic villainous grin. Stop smiling like that, you look like a villain. Playfully poking his cheek with her index finger, Narcissa chuckled and spoke in a teasing tone. Asterion realized he wasn't alone and pretended to cough to cover up the embarrassment he was feeling. I haven't seen Doria. Asterion skillfully changed the subject, shifting Narcissa's focus completely. The woman's lips curved into a smile as she thought of her daughter. She returned to the Malfoy Manor, but she'll be back for dinner with Draco. Narcissa replied happily and relievedly. Asterion nodded and felt relieved that Narcissa didn't dwell on the embarrassing scene he had made earlier. As for Doria, the girl had grown much closer to her mother after the Civil War, where she saw all the dark sides while living at the Lestrange Manor, especially after Lucius Malfoy's imprisonment. Even Draco had begun to draw closer to his mother, as his father languished in Azkaban prison, an outcome Asterion would ensure happened in a very painful manner. He hadn't forgotten the betrayal and pain that man had caused his cousin. "That's good, I wanted to speak with Draco about his seat in Parliament," Asterion replied, rising from the sofa. Narcissa nodded and said, "I'll talk to him about it. Now, go visit Arcturus, he's been waiting for your arrival." Asterion sighed heavily at the mention of his great-grandfather. The man was deteriorating more with each passing day. At this point, Arcturus couldn't even get out of bed without assistance, and it was evident how much he was suffering from his condition. Asterion had tried to heal his great-grandfather, but it was impossible. Even magical energy had its limits when manipulated by humans. As for using a cursed spirit, Asterion hadn't even considered that suicidal option. The negative energy of a cursed spirit was extremely corrosive, putting it inside someone's body was akin to cancer, slowly killing its host. Humans weren't cursed spirits made of pure negative magical energy. While a cursed spirit could be virtually immortal as long as it had negative magical energy, humans were made of flesh, blood, and bones. Even with a great amount of magical energy, regeneration was impossible indefinitely. Reverse magical energy also had its limitations. Even Asterion couldn't regenerate a limb if he were to lose one someday, let alone cure something that was killing cells in a person's body. Giving Narcissa a kiss on the cheek, Asterion ascended the stairs to the upper floor. Upon reaching it, he walked to the door of the bedroom and stopped in front of it. Asterion knocked twice on the door before entering. As soon as he entered the room, Asterion's gaze fell upon Arcturus lying in bed, calmly holding an old photo album. The elderly patriarch of the Black family looked much thinner than before, even healing potions couldn't strengthen the man's body at this point. When the patriarch of the Black family saw Asterion entering, he smiled gently despite his extremely pale face. "How was your first parliamentary meeting?" Sitting in the chair beside the bed, Asterion replied, looking at his great-grandfather. "Educational, to say the least." Arcturus nodded satisfactorily at his response and spoke with a hoarse and tired voice. "Remember, Asterion. Don't trust those cunning foxes, they can act so well that many should be in Muggle movies." He spoke each word with great difficulty, almost as if merely speaking brought agonizing pain to him. Which wasn't entirely untrue, as his lungs were beginning to fail. Asterion didn't need Arcturus's words to know that Parliament was a battlefield, where instead of spells, words and lies were used to wage war. Any important matters? Flipping a page of the photo album, Arcturus asked, caressing a photo of his deceased wife. "We're going to host an international wizarding tournament. Grindelwald's acolytes attacked the ministries of magic in several European countries." Asterion summed it up in a few words as he removed his jacket and draped it over his own thighs. Arcturus stopped caressing the photo of his wife and turned his head so quickly that Asterion wondered if the man was truly ill. "I don't think hosting a wizarding tournament is appropriate in such troubled times," he asked with a serious and exceedingly strong tone, at that moment reverting to the old Arcturus. Displaying a malicious smile, Asterion replied, "France has requested to host the Tri-Wizard tournament." His words caused Arcturus's lips to curl into a scornful smile. Who would have expected that one day those arrogant French would seek help from us, the barbaric English? Just thinking about it, my day brightened with this news. At nearly 94 years of age, Arcturus immediately sensed the intentions of the French Ministry of Magic. Asterion chuckled at his great-grandfather's reaction, knowing Arcturus also harbored dislike towards the French, especially after French wizards' involvement in the Civil War 6 months prior. The tense relationship between England and France had lasted for centuries, intensifying further during the 100 Years' War. With current French actions, this relationship had become even more strained. Arcturus's face then became exceptionally serious. He looked at his great-grandson and spoke with a concerned tone. "Be cautious with other countries, we may be isolated if a world war truly breaks out. Use this tournament to secure allies, even if it means sacrificing some interests. Being isolated in a war is dreadful, especially for us on an island, we could be surrounded from all sides." Even in his final moments, Arcturus wanted to help Asterion. Even if it meant sacrificing his life to aid his great-grandson, he wouldn't hesitate. "I understand, but I don't believe another magical world war will occur," Asterion replied. He could grasp Arcturus's concerns but didn't think this conflict would escalate into a world war. "I will talk to other countries, especially the Nordic countries, to cover the North Sea," Asterion said seriously. Even though he doubted such a large conflict would break out, he wanted to be prepared just in case. A cautious man is a living man. Chapter 102, The Black Sisters, 1. Crossing the barrier that protected the Black Mansion, the Tonks family car approached, and Nymphadора's eyes widened at the enormous building constructed in Victorian Gothic style. Fuck, this isn't a mansion, it's a damn palace. She instinctively cursed out loud, her hair changing to many colors, showing just how shocked she was. Andromeda, in the back seat with her daughter, gave her a reproachful look and reprimanded her without hesitation. Nymphadora Tonks, don't use that rude language, especially here. Nymphadора's hair turned red with embarrassment at hearing her name, but just as she was about to retort, her father Ted's look he was driving made her keep her mouth shut. However, she still murmured in a dissatisfied tone, "Don't call me Nymphadora." Shaking her head, Andromeda let out a tired sigh and focused on the enormous mansion, her eyes filling with a feeling of nostalgia and reluctance. The fists resting on her thighs clenched tightly, showing that the woman was not as calm as she appeared on the outside. Ted looked in the rearview mirror at his wife in the back seat and remained silent. He knew his wife better than anyone. Andromeda was so nervous that she was in the position she always took when she was anxious about something. Turning his gaze to the mansion, Ted showed a complex look. Being the cause of his wife's expulsion always brought a lot of guilt to the man, especially when he saw his wife looking at the photo album with longing eyes. Letting out a sigh, Ted focused and skillfully parked the car in front of the mansion. He turned off the car, put on the handbrake, and got out of the car, helping to open the door for his wife while his daughter got out on her own. "Thank you, Ted," Andromeda said after getting out of the car, giving a sweet smile to her husband and entwining her arm with his. When the family gathered in front of the door and knocked, the doors opened, revealing an old house elf. Andromeda almost immediately recognized the black house elf Kriaker. "It's good to see you again, Kriaker." Andromeda greeted the elf with a sweet and gentle smile. "Lord Asterion awaits you in the drawing room." Ignoring Andromeda's greeting, the house elf gave the woman an unpleasant look and spoke in a humble tone. Andromeda couldn't help but show a bitter expression upon hearing the house elf's tone. Nymphadora, who heard everything, looked rudely at the mummy-like creature known as Kriaker. When she was impulsively about to draw her wand, she saw her father looking at her with an almost deadly gaze. Reluctantly putting her wand away, she looked at her father with an angry glare and then back at the house elf, as if promising that this wasn't over. Entering the mansion, the first thing the Tonks family saw was the enormous statue of the Black House ancestor Corvinus Black. For some reason, in front of the statue, Tonks felt as if she was under the gaze of a very stern grandfather, especially since the statue's eyes, made of rubies, seemed almost alive for a moment. Andromeda picked up the hem of her skirt and curtsied gracefully to the statue. Ted, recalling the etiquette lessons his wife had made him attend, placed his hand over his chest and bowed slightly forward. Seeing this, Kriaker showed a satisfied and proud look, and he guided the entire Tonks family more efficiently than before. Without realizing it, they all arrived at a room with sofas and armchairs, a fireplace burning with crackling flames. The gaze of the entire Tonks family fell upon the young man and woman sitting side by side, each calmly sipping a cup of tea. "Sissy." Andromeda, seeing her younger sister, couldn't help but smile again. "Dromeda." Narcissa also smiled at her older sister. She stood up and embraced her. "What a beautiful reunion, little sisters." Suddenly, the doors of the room were opened, and Bellatrix entered, ignoring the wide-eyed looks of Ted and Tonks. "Bella." Andromeda was also shocked by her older sister's entrance. Finally seeing the three black sisters together for the first time, Asterion couldn't help but think they were completely different from each other. As if reading Asterion's mind, Bellatrix's lips curved into a malicious smile. "Didn't I tell you, Master? My lovely mother probably cheated on my lovely father, look how different we are from each other." Bellatrix's words made Narcissa's and Andromeda's faces turn very dark. Bellatrix's words were no different from calling them bastards. "Bella." Narcissa growled her older sister's name. Andromeda, next to her, also looked fiercely at her older sister. The two exchanged glances and confirmed each other's thoughts. Without any hesitation, they both rushed towards Bellatrix. Seeing this, Bellatrix turned and ran, fleeing without looking back even once. "Don't run, Bella, and face our wrath," Andromeda shouted loudly with a big smile on her lips. "I refuse." Bellatrix sped up even more with her words. Narcissa remained silent and jumped over the sofa, almost catching Bellatrix by a hair. Seeing the three grown women running around the room like mischievous children left Asterion speechless, but noticing the smiles on their lips, he realized that all three were having fun after a reunion of decades. "Please, have a seat." Asterion gestured for Ted and Nymphadora to sit across from him on the sofa. "Thank you for the invitation, Lord Black." Sitting on the sofa, Ted responded with a smile as well. Seeing his wife enjoying herself like this made him realize how much she missed her family. "I wanted to surprise Arcturus." Although he hasn't said anything, the man still wants to see the whole family reunited once more. Asterion replied calmly, bringing the cup to his lips and tasting the tea. Ted nodded and remained silent. An awkward silence hung in the air. He really didn't have much to talk about with someone as powerful and famous as Asterion Black, a special grade wizard. "Asterion, I joined the Aurors." Seeing her father's predicament, Tonks spoke with a big smile, her purple hair changing to a very bright gold, apparently very proud of joining the Aurors. "Congratulations, Nymph." Asterion congratulated her with a very sincere tone. It was truly a great achievement to become an Auror at 20. Only the best of the best could become an Auror, especially right after graduating from Hogwarts. It was a notable accomplishment. Tonks lifted her head with pride and received the praise from the powerful special grade wizard as if it were natural, as if it were normal to be praised by powerful people. "Please, avoid talking about Bellatrix when you're outside the mansion." Calmly drinking his tea, Asterion's red eyes fell on Ted and Tonks. Although it was just a normal look to Ted and Nymphadora, it felt like a mountain on their shoulders. Both nodded, agreeing with Asterion's words. They could see that Asterion was serious. While they conversed, the three sisters finally tired of running and sat on the same sofa with a rather inelegant posture. "You didn't manage to catch me. I'm still the best older sister in the world." Catching her breath, Bellatrix spoke, looking at her two sisters with an extremely proud look. This made Narcissus and Andromeda's faces contort for a moment. "Best older sister in the world?" They couldn't believe her shameless words and snorted coldly. "Let's go see the old man already. If we wait any longer, he might enter the coffin, literally." Bellatrix was indifferent to her sister's judging looks and spoke lazily. Chapter 103, The Black Sisters, 2. Arcturus was in bed, reading some old letters his wife had written to him during his missions in Europe. Seeing the elegant handwriting on the yellowed paper, a smile appeared on the old patriarch of the House of Black. Suddenly, the doors were abruptly opened. Arcturus didn't even need to lift his head to know that his great-niece, Bellatrix, had entered his room. She was the only person without etiquette in the mansion. But the patriarch soon raised his head, hearing more footsteps entering his room. His gaze fell on Bellatrix, Narcissa, and finally Andromeda. He ignored everyone else, a gentle smile appearing on his face as he looked at Andromeda. "Look at you, child," Arcturus said, looking at his great-niece, Andromeda. He glanced at Asterion, who was smiling at him, and understood his great-grandson's plan. Seeing the state of her powerful great-uncle, Andromeda's eyes filled with tears. From what she remembered, her great-uncle had always been tall and broad-shouldered. Now, seeing his frail and thin state shook the image of him in her mind. In her impression, even if the sky were to fall, the man would be there to hold it up, but seeing his current state, she realized he was just like any other person, and at this moment, just a gentle grandfather. "You are married and already a mother, how can you cry like this? If Druella saw her daughter like this, she would scold you." Seeing his great-niece crying upon seeing him, Arcturus spoke in a tone of reproach, but much gentler. "She would probably be furious," Bellatrix said, the image of her mother getting furious making her lips curve into a very happy smile. Andromeda wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and rolled her eyes at her older sister's words. Meanwhile, Narcissa sat in the chair beside the bed, holding Arcturus's skeletal hand. "That must be my great-granddaughter." Arcturus's gaze fell on Nymphadora, who was embarrassed by the gentle and warm look of the man lying in bed. Her purple hair changed color, turning crimson-red. Seeing this, the smile on Arcturus's face grew even more. "You have a wonderful gift, work hard and you will become an excellent witch, child." He spoke in a gentle tone, happy that at the end of his life, he could be surrounded by his family again. As for the rules, they would follow them again in hell, like all the members of his house. Nymphadora nodded seriously and watched her mother happily conversing with the old man and her sisters with a happy look. It was the first time she had seen her mother smile like that. This made Tonks very happy. If she had known, she would have talked to Asterion much earlier. Asterion, who had been silent for fear of interrupting the reunion, suddenly looked towards the entrance of the mansion, a smile appearing on his lips as he sensed the familiar aura of his uncle, who soon arrived in the room. "You're still alive, you arrogant old man." Sirius entered the room reeking strongly of alcohol. The smile on Arcturus's face vanished upon seeing his grandson. "Humph, I won't die before you, you insolent brat. Are you cursing me to die young, old man?" Sirius gritted his teeth at his grandfather's words. "With the amount of alcohol you consume, I'm surprised your liver hasn't withered away yet." Arcturus scoffed, mocking his irresponsible grandson. Seeing the two about to argue at any moment, Andromeda let out a pleasant laugh. Although it seemed like a heated exchange, she could see that both cared deeply for each other. This was just their way of communicating. Hearing the laugh, Sirius's gaze fell on his cousin whom he hadn't seen in a long time. "Andy." He greeted her with a smile and hugged her warmly, giving her a gentle kiss on the cheek. "Look at your state, you're not taking care of yourself again, Sirius." Andromeda held Sirius's face and spoke in a gentle yet very stern tone. Sirius just showed an embarrassed smile while scratching the back of his head. Watching the interaction between Sirius and Andromeda, Bellatrix's lips curved into a malicious smile. "This reminds me of when I caught Sirius and Andromeda kissing when we were kids. Our mother was completely furious, saying that Sirius had contaminated Andromeda." She spoke in a deliberately loud tone, making sure everyone heard her words clearly. Andromeda's pale cheeks flushed with her embarrassing past being revealed, especially with her husband and daughter present in the room. Sirius just pretended to cough, feeling the particularly cold gaze of his cousin's husband. Tonks's eyes widened at her mother's dark past. She hadn't expected her elegant and noble mother to have done something like that as a child. It seemed impossible given how well she knew her mother. Arcturus, seeing the scene, just laughed and felt fortunate to witness this before he died. Now he felt he could die without regrets. Asterion sat on the armrest of the chair where Narcissa was and smiled, watching everything, especially the smile on Arcturus's face. He knew he had made the right choice seeing him smile like that. Suddenly, Arcturus's voice called everyone's attention in the room. "I have to apologize to you both, Bellatrix and Narcissa." Narcissa and Bellatrix looked confused at the old patriarch. "I thought the grandsons of my former teammates, Abrax II Malfoy and Fulcrum IV Lestrange, were respectable men like their grandfathers, but over time, it proved otherwise. You had unhappy marriages because of me. I understand if you never forgive me for that." Arcturus spoke each word with difficulty, his face full of regret, especially seeing Andromeda's happy relationship with Ted. Note: Abrax II Malfoy and Fulcrum IV are OC characters. "You don't need to worry about that, old man." Bellatrix spoke casually. Though Rodolphus was uninteresting, it was fun torturing him mentally for years. When she said this, Tonks and Ted looked horrified at her, but Sirius, Narcissa, Asterion, and Andromeda didn't show much reaction. They knew Bellatrix too well to be surprised by her words. "Though my marriage was truly unhappy as you said, I still have beautiful children, so at least I have something to be happy about. Besides, you couldn't have known what Lucius was like." Narcissa held Arcturus's hand more firmly and spoke in a calm but gentle tone. Arcturus looked at his two great nieces who didn't blame him for his mistakes and let out a tired, regretful sigh. "Still, I feel awful for making life difficult for you both. It's all right, we still have time to enjoy life. Unlike you, old man." Bellatrix spoke proudly, her gaze discreetly focusing on Asterion. Narcissa beside her nodded silently, confirming her older sister's words. Arcturus let out another sigh, but a smile appeared on his lips. Although he didn't know if they were speaking the truth, it relieved one of his regrets. "Dinner has been prepared and is waiting for us." Asterion spoke to everyone, including Ted and Nymphadora, skillfully changing the slightly tense atmosphere in the room. Arcturus, who couldn't get out of bed, gathered his strength, got down from the bed, and walked as if he had never been ill, although Andromeda and Narcissa were by his side for any emergency. As everyone walked to the dining room, Asterion approached Narcissa and whispered to her, "Draco and Doria just arrived." Narcissa nodded and went to fetch her children for dinner. Sitting around the table, Arcturus looked at his entire family and smiled sincerely. It was truly good to see the Black Mansion full of life again after so long. He ate and drank like never before, and although the environment was quiet because everyone was eating, the atmosphere was truly cozy. Chapter 104, Rose's past. 1. Rose always knew she was different, although her Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia always made her believe otherwise when in fact she was very special. They wanted her to be normal at all costs, but that wasn't possible for her. Seeing human-devouring monsters everywhere wasn't exactly something a normal child should be able to see, and Rose was able to see them. Rose knew she wasn't normal, not when her eyes could see the atomic molecules that make up the world. Not when she could instinctively manipulate space almost as if it were natural. She was special, and that made her happy. But what was a special child in a normal family supposed to do to stay sane in the face of this? Rose didn't know what other children would do in her place, but she chose to use sarcastic humor to keep from going crazy. She used sarcastic humor to add a bit of color to the reality she saw through her special eyes. She used it to defend herself against every derogatory remark her Uncle Vernon directed at her, or when her cousin tried to beat her up at school with his equally stupid friends. The reason for his aggression was the stupidest of all, just because she was different from him. Nothing more, nothing less. This made her understand that people didn't like those who were different from them. To defend herself from insults about the color of her hair and eyes, she put on a proud and strong mask. If the other side was arrogant, she was even more arrogant. Naturally, things didn't go the way she thought they would. Especially when she responded to the school teacher in the same arrogant manner. The number of times her Aunt Petunia was called to the principal's office that year increased by 200%. And like any parents who don't know how to raise a child, instead of talking, asking the reason, and explaining that it was wrong, she was always locked in her room. Not that the room could prevent her from leaving if she wanted to, but since it was her room and she didn't want to sleep under the stars, she refrained from destroying it. Rose's first serious fight, when she was about 7 years old, was against a very large, disgusting monster that looked like a caterpillar. And it was the first time she used red on something living. Since she was able to manipulate space, she used physics books as a training manual, though it took her a while to understand some of the more complex concepts in the books, but nothing too complicated for her eyes. According to Albert Einstein's theory, 7-year-old Rose created an attack called red, an extremely strong repulsive force, capable of pushing everything in its path. The red crushed the grotesque monster as if someone had smashed an insect, leaving behind a crater with a grotesque amount of purple blood around it. It was then that the 7-year-old girl, without a teacher or friends, began her nightly adventures fighting these aberrations. 11-year-old Rose woke up like any other day before this one. After going through her morning routine, she went downstairs and reached the kitchen, where she began making breakfast for herself and her family. While making their breakfast, Rose pretended to be momentarily careless and dumped an unusually large amount of pepper into the food meant for her uncle. "How careless of me," Rose murmured with a very wicked expression. She grabbed the pepper shaker and added a bit more to Dudley's plate. As for Aunt Petunia, Rose assumed that hearing her son's screams would be enough to mentally torture the woman. Just imagining Dudley's face turning red like a shrimp as he ran desperately around the house made the smile on Rose's lips grow even wider. Humming cheerfully, Rose finished her breakfast and left the house. Unfortunately, she wouldn't be able to witness the funny scene that would be the Dursley family's breakfast. She had more important matters to attend to. In front of her house, Rose saw Mrs. Figg watching her intently, as if keeping an eye on her. The lost daughter of the Potter house really didn't know why this cabbage-smelling woman stared at her every day. Showing a V sign with her fingers to the woman, Rose gave a mocking smile and walked down the sidewalk with her hands in the pockets of her sweatpants. Little Whinging wasn't exactly big, but Rose knew that beneath this seemingly peaceful town, monsters devoured people, and for some reason, these monsters were generated by the negative emotions that normal people unconsciously emitted. As to why this happened, even with her eyes, Rose had no idea, but she knew it had something to do with a mystical connection she had detected once. What intrigued Rose was that despite the deaths she witnessed, nothing was reported in the newspapers or on TV, almost as if they hadn't happened. So, she assumed she wasn't the only one with this energy running through her body. This group or organization was purposely hiding the existence of the monsters. This was something Rose readily agreed to do. Just imagining how much negative emotion would be generated if normal people knew about the existence of the monsters made Rose shiver. It would be a scenario worthy of an apocalyptic movie. As for finding this organization, Rose was in no hurry, especially since she didn't know how they would react to her existence. Prematurely exposing herself wasn't exactly a smart move. "Got you." Suddenly, Rose's steps halted. She raised her head and looked at an abandoned building with a malicious smile. She had been hunting this monster for 2 weeks, it was entirely different from the other monsters she had encountered before. This one could move from its origin point and had an absurdly rapid growth rate. Rose knew that if she didn't catch it today, this monster would become a much bigger problem, potentially endangering the entire town. And that wasn't a risk she wanted to leave unchecked. Easily jumping over the metal fence protecting the building, she landed on the other side with her hands in her pockets. Suddenly, she couldn't feel the monster's aura anymore, but that didn't discourage her, on the contrary, the smile on her face grew. Even while camouflaging its own presence, the monster didn't know it left traces of energy wherever it went, so it didn't matter if it hid now. With her hands in her pockets, Rose whistled as she walked toward the building that resembled an abandoned hospital. "Let's play a little," she thought as she entered the building, her incredibly blue eyes glowing with a phosphorescent shine. Dash! With her steps echoing in the empty, dusty corridor, Rose showed no sign of nervousness or fear, only a bored expression. The monster hadn't appeared even after half an hour, but she could feel its gaze. Cruel and hungry. Rose's smile widened as she felt the gaze on her becoming increasingly uncontrollable. In the end, even after gaining wisdom, an animal was still an animal, driven by instinct. Suddenly, Rose jumped into the air and stuck to the ceiling upside down. In the spot where she had been, black spikes made from an unknown liquid emerged from the floor. If she had stayed there, her body would have been pierced numerous times, which definitely wouldn't have been good. "You finally decided to show up. Are you ready to die?" Rose said, smiling arrogantly. That day, she killed another monster, a very special one though equally as weak as all the others before it and just like the ones to come. Chapter 105, Arrival of Country Representatives, 1. "When do you return to Hogwarts? This place is so boring without you," Asterion heard Daphne's voice through a mirror on his dresser. In the mirror's reflection, Daphne's image was perfectly clear, her blue eyes fixed on his abdomen, unable to look away for a long time. Putting on his white long-sleeved shirt, Asterion calmly responded to his fiancée, "In 2 weeks, I have to deal with some things at the clock tower." He buttoned his shirt without minding Daphne's gaze. Sometimes it was amusing to see the noble and elegant Daphne Greengrass act so pervertedly. Did something important happen? Hearing Asterion mention the clock tower, Daphne reluctantly tore her gaze from her fiancé's abdomen and asked worriedly, looking at him. "You should read the newspapers more often, they are important sources of information, Daphne. But to answer your question, the Triwizard Tournament will be held this year along with numerous countries. I was chosen to greet all the representatives from the countries arriving in England," Asterion responded, rolling his eyes at his fiancée. He knew Daphne didn't like reading newspapers much, but he hadn't expected her to be unaware of such an important event. "Newspapers are boring, and I have a lot to study, I don't have as much free time as before. The second year is very demanding, I can barely eat without being in a hurry to get to class," Daphne defended herself vehemently, clearly displeased with his words. Asterion didn't respond back, knowing that in a battle of words, he was no match for his fiancée, especially since he was always wrong in her eyes. Asterisk woof. Woof. Woof, asterisk. Hearing the barks, Daphne's gaze fell on the small puppy that emerged from Asterion's shadow. The puppy had hundreds of eyes, all looking at her with great dissatisfaction, as if it didn't like her words at all. "That furry little thing is so protective of you, Asti," Daphne laughed, looking at the adorable dog with amusement. Baskerville's size didn't seem intimidating to her. Asterion also laughed. He had used Baskerville's blood to recreate his faithful companion and had succeeded after using an insane amount of negative magical energy. This time, Baskerville had been recreated using both of Asterion's innate techniques, which made the dog extremely strong with even more insane protective abilities. Although the demon dog was slightly different than before. Don't get it wrong, Baskerville was still as sadistic and cruel as before, but after dying and being recreated, he seemed much smarter than before. Asterion assumed he had infused more negative magical energy than necessary, causing Baskerville to attain the intelligence of a cursed spirit that had departed from its original place. Of course, Baskerville's cute appearance was purely his own choice. For some reason, his cursed spirit found it more intelligent to make his master's enemies lower their guard when they saw how adorable he looked. "I have to go, Daphne." Placing the watch on his wrist, Asterion turned to the mirror on the dresser, where Daphne's image was being projected. "Remember to call me the night before you go to sleep." Daphne nodded and spoke before ending the magical connection between her mirror and Asterion's. Baskerville emerged from his master's shadow, but his hundreds of eyes still appeared in his shadow. Leaving the room, Asterion found Narcissa waiting for him. She was wearing a long skirt that reached her ankles and a white lace blouse with long sleeves. Her pale blonde hair was styled in an elegant bun. She held an agenda against her belly. The former Lady Malfoy looked like a secretary. Which is exactly what she was at the moment. The secretary of the Lord of the Clock Tower in the 9th Department of Curses, Asterion Black. Narcissa, feeling bored from spending all day at the mansion, had offered to work at the Clock Tower, an offer Asterion had gladly accepted. The amount of paperwork he had to sign couldn't be described in words. With Narcissa's addition, Asterion practically only needed to sign a few more important documents while the easier ones were handled by Narcissa. At first, he was concerned about the heavy workload, but seeing how diligent and satisfied Narcissa was after starting work, he put those concerns aside. As for Bellatrix, Asterion only knew that she was conducting some experiments in the basement. He didn't ask what experiments they were or why there were screams late at night. As long as it wasn't involving innocents, Asterion was indifferent to Bellatrix's actions. Arcturus was still Arcturus, the man was still alive, although deteriorating every day. Asterion wanted to delay as long as possible before taking the man to the secret room. Who will be the first to arrive? Walking through the mansion's corridors, Asterion asked Narcissa beside him. The current Minister of Magic from France, Louis Delacour, and his family. Narcissa opened her agenda and answered, her high heels skillfully stepping on the floor. Current? Asterion asked, confused. He hadn't paid much attention to France recently, so he was surprised by the new Minister of Magic from France. A month ago, elections were held in France, and the new Minister of Magic was chosen. Narcissa continued, Louis Delacour is a pure-blood wizard very popular in France. He is married to Ofilia, which has made him highly regarded in the eyes of other races and many French wizards and witches. Asterion was genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected Fleur Delacour's father to be elected as the French Minister of Magic at this delicate moment, which also explained one of the reasons for France's recent desire for reconciliation. Asti, do you want me to fetch an alchemical item that prevents Vila charm affecting your mind? Narcissa asked, furrowing her brow, mindful of the Vila's extraordinary charm. Asterion shook his head and replied indifferently, no need, I can control myself just fine. With Baskerville looming behind him, he felt no fear of any influence, even though Vila charm was renowned for being nearly invincible. By the way, is your cursed spirit going to remain exposed like this? Narcissa asked, pointing at the hundreds of eyes in his cousin's shadow. Honestly, it was a bit unsettling to be stared at by hundreds of wide red eyes. I let him do as he pleases, Asterion shrugged and moved on. Narcissa said nothing more and continued introducing the numerous representatives who had come or would come to England in the near future. As they conversed, both exited the mansion, got into a car, and headed towards the clock tower. Chapter 106, Arrival of Country Representatives, 2. Asterion, Narcissa, and several other senators stood before a large number of fireplaces burning with emerald green flames. Behind them, a sizable group of journalists awaited the arrival of the French delegation in England. Except for Asterion and Narcissa, whether senators or journalists, everyone displayed quite displeased expressions at the moment. They're nearly half an hour late, grumbled Amelia Bones, a senator of Parliament, as she glanced at her pocket watch. The apparent and quite disrespectful delay of the French delegation left her very upset. Minister Delacour must still be dressing with his half-blood wife, a senator mocked in the background, prompting disdainful laughter from everyone. Clearly, the lineage of the French Minister of Magic's wife was already well known. Perhaps in France, marrying another race was something new and warmly welcomed. But in England, where witches and wizards considered themselves the finest breed in the world, tainting one's blood was definitely frowned upon. Senator Carl Foley, please refrain from any remarks that might affect the image of our beautiful country in front of delegations from other nations. We are not barbarians, Asterion said calmly, looking at the nephew of the neutral faction lord, his voice causing many to lose their smiles and adopt a serious expression. Asterion knew that a man like this had only become a senator of parliament through nepotism, but he didn't say anything against it. Everyone hated nepotism, but when benefiting from it, everyone loved it. If Asterion didn't have talent, he himself would be like Carl Foley, relying on Arcturus' influence to survive in this dirty and crazy world. Lord Black is right, Carl. Don't be rude, we are noble gentlemen, another senator agreed with Asterion's words, smiling quite amiably at him. Carl Foley felt his cheeks heat up under the unkind gazes of his colleagues. With just a simple phrase, Lord Black had made him feel isolated from most people in the moment. But he knew that everyone wanted to earn the favor of the special grade wizard. Traitors, Karl murmured inaudibly. Ignoring the sycophants, Asterion took out a silver pocket watch and opened it. Seeing the time and no sign of the French government's arrival, Asterion began to think that something had gone wrong. Just as he was about to order everyone to step back and inquire if something had happened to the French government, the emerald flames of 10 fireplaces suddenly surged. Countless wizards and witches began to emerge from the flames, elbows close to their bodies. They want to make a grand entrance, Narcissa commented with a touch of sarcasm in her low voice. They're expected to preserve their dignity, even in this tense moment in Europe, Asterion whispered back to Narcissa, his gaze fixed on the man in the center. He wasn't very tall, measuring about 174 centimeters in height, dressed in a very elegant blue suit. His brown hair was perfectly styled to the side, and his blue eyes, coupled with a friendly smile, made him quite handsome. The current French Minister of Magic Louise Delacour. Beside him stood perhaps the most aesthetically beautiful woman Asterion had ever seen. Her silver hair cascaded like a waterfall of soft silver strands over her shoulders and back. Her eyes were a striking shade of deep gold, almost like pools of melted gold. Her full, sensual lips curved into a smile adorned with a bold shade of red lipstick. Under her hair, she wore a stylish French beret adorned with beautiful flowers. She wore an elegant blue dress matching her husband's, which perfectly accentuated her almost supernatural curves. She was the wife of the French Minister of Magic and a half-Villa Apollon Delacour. Next to Apollon, there were 2 young girls, both nearly identical to their mother but lacking her beautiful golden eyes. Instead, they inherited their father's icy, cold blue eyes. Fleur and Gabrielle Delacour. One 17 years old and the other 13, both wore blue dresses and blue berets decorated with butterflies and flowers. Welcome to England, Minister Delacour, Asterion approached and greeted the French Minister of Magic. The pleasure is all mine, Monsieur Black. Louise shook Asterion's hand and posed together for a photo, which journalists eagerly snapped. Louise selectively ignored the hundreds of unsettling eyes shadowing Asterion. After the photo, he gestured to the stunning woman beside him and introduced her. This is my wife, Apollon, and my 2 daughters, Fleur and Gabrielle. It's a pleasure to meet you, Monsieur Black. Apollon graciously smiled and extended her hand towards Asterion. Her English was mixed with a lovely French accent, which added to her charm. She glanced at the hundreds of red eyes in Asterion's shadow for a moment and easily brushed aside the hundreds of unsettling gazes. Madame Apollon, rumors about your beauty do not do justice to your appearance in person, Asterion said, delicately holding her fingertips and lowering his hand to kiss her knuckles, but without his lips touching her skin. After all, she was a married woman. Monsieur Black, you are very polite, Apollon replied, withdrawing her hand and letting out a graceful laugh, evidently pleased with the sincere compliment, especially coming from someone not easily enchanted by her charm. The men around couldn't take their eyes off Apollon for a single second since she appeared, including the senators who had previously mocked the French First Lady's lineage. Asterion swore he heard someone gulp behind him. Turning, Asterion looked at the 2 young women and greeted them even more courteously, Lady Fleur. It's a pleasure to meet you, Monsieur Black. We've heard many rumors about you, Fleur spoke elegantly, her blue eyes discreetly examining Asterion from head to toe. Asterion merely offered a polite smile and didn't reply. He then turned to the younger of the Delacour sisters and greeted her with elegance, Lady Gabrielle. The teenager didn't respond, she just stared fixedly at Asterion's face, her cheeks flushing pink, her eyes shining as if she were seeing a pop idol. Fleur had to discreetly elbow her younger sister to snap her out of her stunned state. Are you all right? Feeling unwell? Asterion ignored the sister's small actions and asked calmly. Oh! Gabrielle let out a small surprised gasp, feeling her cheeks burn even more as she realized her behavior, and hurriedly spoke, inventing a rather dubious excuse. It's all right, I'm just not used to the temperature in England. Her English, mixed with a lovely French accent, which Asterion found quite pleasant to hear. Asterion's lips twitched unnaturally at the overly obvious excuse from the teenager, but he said nothing and turned back to speak with the French Minister of Magic. Fleur looked at her younger sister with an amused look and spoke in French, it was funny to see you looking at him like a love-struck puppy. Gabrielle widened her eyes and looked angrily at her older sister, speaking with an adorable pout on her lips, You're mean, sister. Teasing me like this. Fleur covered her mouth with her lace-gloved hand and laughed, narrowing her eyes playfully at her younger sister. I see my 2 lovely angels are having fun. Apollon appeared beside her daughters and spoke, laughing graciously. What do you think of him? Apollon covered her mouth elegantly and whispered in French. Her eyes fell on Asterion, who was taking photos with the entire French delegation. He wasn't affected by our charm, Fleur spoke after a brief pause. Apollon agreed with her daughter's words. Asterion truly wasn't swayed by her charm or that of her daughter. Handsome, strong, graceful, perfect. The words poured out of Gabrielle's mouth non-stop, her eyes fixed on Asterion for a long time, leaving Apollon and Fleur speechless. I know you're infatuated, but be a bit more subtle, Gab. Besides, he's engaged. Papa wouldn't want a scandal at this moment. Fleur looked at her sister and spoke with concern. Gabrielle's cheeks reddened at her sister's words, and reluctantly she tore her gaze away from her crush. Hearing that Asterion was engaged made a cold, piercing look reflect in her eyes. Not for long, I doubt Daphne Greengrass is as beautiful as me, she murmured to herself, her eyes returning to focus on Asterion conversing with her father. Oh my god, they grow up so fast, Apollon sighed tiredly, but the amused smile on her lips didn't disappear for a second. As for Asterion, he did catch her attention, especially because there was no contempt or disgust like with other British wizards she was feeling at the moment. Although lust was evident in every man's gaze, they still despised her, a half-blood. She sensually licked her lips, looking at that perfect face of the young man. It was truly rare to see such a young, handsome, and powerful man. Even Apollon herself was tempted. Chapter 107, Arrival of Country Representatives, 3. What do you think of the actions of Grindelwald's acolytes in Europe, Monsieur Black? Asked Louis, looking at the young man beside him. His smile remained unchanged, even in the face of numerous glances. Louis knew it wouldn't be easy to achieve what he wanted in Britain, especially while still cleaning up the mess left by his predecessor, nearly destroying the France-England relationship. Yet, he needed to try, not just to stay in power, but also to help his country. Truly a tragedy what happened, so many wizards and witches lost their lives in the attacks, Asterion responded with a heavy expression and a dignified, sincere tone. Inside, he thanked Grindelwald. If not for his timely attack, all European countries would be focused on England, which was recovering from the Civil War. It was a great opportunity to strengthen themselves at this moment, with the world's eyes on Europe. England wouldn't be sabotaged because European countries needed help, especially with Dumbledore being the only known man capable of fighting the powerful Dark Lord Gellert Grindelwald. Louis nodded and smiled, but he didn't believe Asterion's words one bit, knowing the English's hatred of France, especially after this civil war the English and French have entered into that Voldemort began. Not that France didn't harbour hatred towards England, the 100 Years' War had been a deep wound to France's pride, considering itself one of the oldest countries in the world. Both had reasons to love and hate each other. As they conversed, the emerald flames from the fireplaces suddenly grew taller, and from them emerged several male wizards dressed in winter clothes. Among them, one man stood out. Standing 2 meters tall, he resembled a bear in his winter attire. His medium-length, curly black hair fell over his shoulders, and a long beard surrounded his face. He had a serious and cold expression, topped with a traditional Russian hat. This man was Dmitry Ivanov, the Minister of Magic of Russia, one of the 2 special-grade wizards in Russia. Spotting Asterion and Louis, he walked over to them and spoke in English with a strong Russian accent. It seems I am the second to arrive, he said, and Asterion had to concentrate hard, otherwise, he wouldn't understand what Ivanov was saying. Minister Ivanov. Asterion extended his hand and greeted the powerful special-grade wizard. Niaise Black. The Russian minister firmly shook Asterion's hand and returned the greeting. His gaze was respectful, mirroring the respect Asterion showed towards him. The Russian minister valued strength and recognized the young man's prowess before him. But looking towards the French Minister of Magic, Ivanov glanced disdainfully from head to toe but still extended his hand to him. Louis's smile remained unchanged as he greeted the Russian minister with great politeness, maintaining his prestige. This surprised Asterion. He had expected there to be an exchange of insults, especially from Louis. After all, if the 100 Years' War had been a deep wound to French pride, the Napoleonic Wars nearly extinguished France's arrogance. The loss of over 500,000 soldiers on Russian soil prevented France from ever fully recovering its former glory. After the greetings, the 3 began taking photos together, each shaking hands. They all displayed smiles for the cameras while likely hiding their true thoughts at that moment. Fake smiles and nothing more. Politics truly is interesting, Apollon commented beside Narcissa, who selectively ignored the overly charming woman. But I love politics, power means having more freedom than anyone else, and that's fascinating, Apollon continued, ignoring Narcissa's increasingly cold demeanor. If you want to talk, just talk, Madame Delacour, Narcissa turned and spoke with a chilly tone. She didn't get along well with people like Apollon, who spoke every second and exuded charisma. Apollon wasn't offended by the woman's cold words, on the contrary, she smiled graciously and linked arms with Narcissa. We'll go shopping once this ceremony is over. I won't take no for an answer, Apollon said with a very serious yet charming tone before Narcissa could object. Narcissa couldn't help but look to Asterion for help, but her cousin was engrossed, focusing only on the French and Russian ministers of magic. Grimacing, Narcissa nodded stiffly, causing Apollon to laugh even more. With the arrival of the Russian delegation, representatives from other European countries began to appear one after another. Minister of Magic for Austria Helena von Strauss. Minister of Magic for Germany Joseph Weiss. Minister of Magic for Italy Valentino Ricci. Minister of Magic for Greece Nicholas Papadopoulos. Minister of Magic for Sweden Ingrid Bergström. Minister of Magic for Spain Alejandro Dominguez. Representing the American continents were President of MACUSA Benjamin Thorne. Minister of Magic for Brazil Carlos de Silva Pereira. And finally, the two representatives from Asia. Minister of Magic for Japan Satoshi Nakamura. Minister of Magic for China Mei Ling Zhao. It was a total of 12 countries that accepted the proposal for an international magic and wizardry tournament in England. Among the 12 ministers, presidents, and Asterion, more than half were special grade wizards. This meant that there were 7 special grade wizards present at that moment. Excluding the special conference in Geneva, where all special grade wizards gathered every 4 years, this was the largest event where special grade wizards were assembled in one place. Asterion lost count of how many photos he took that afternoon, there were so many that his eyes began to ache by the end of the day. His smile was rigid on his lips, and he vowed that he would rarely smile from that day forward. At the same time, his gaze fell upon the French and German ministers of magic, both conversing amiably. This caused Asterion's eyes to narrow dangerously for a moment. It wasn't a good sign in Asterion's eyes. Despite France and Germany having their differences and deep hatred stemming from the events of World War II, the Blackhair did not doubt for a moment that these two countries could ally themselves in a time of need. After all, interests alone are eternal. In the meantime, Asterion also observed the other representatives and quickly realized that the entire ceremony was divided into very distinct blocks. Japan and China, in particular, did not seem eager to initiate a conversation with each other. Asterion understood this well. After all, China harbored deep resentment towards Japan for the war crimes committed during World War II on Chinese soil. These two countries were the only ones Asterion saw no possibility of allying, which naturally suited him. As for the rest of the countries, he was conflicted about which to ally with, but he left that decision to the more experienced individuals at the moment. Chapter 108 Party 1. Looking at the extremely luxurious party happening at the moment, Asterion couldn't help but think that these people were dancing and eating cake while their countries were burning. It was ironic, given that they were elected to represent the rights of the population. Bringing the champagne glass to his lips, he tilted it back, drinking the beverage in one go. The alcohol, as always, had no effect on him, it only served as a simple relaxation. We meet again, Lord Black. Hearing the clamorous and graceful voice beside him, Asterion turned to see the French First Lady approaching. From the little time he had spent with the woman, he already had an idea of her personality and character. Apollon Delacour was a woman with an almost insatiable hunger for power. But he didn't dislike such people. After all, ambition was never a bad thing, regardless of one's ideals. The desire to be something more was shared by all humanity. Madame Delacour. Despite what he was thinking, Asterion greeted the woman with all possible courtesy. Coming dangerously close to Asterion, Apollon smiled gracefully at the renowned British special grade wizard. Being a half-Vila, she could sense the colossal amount of magical energy simmering beneath that perfect body. Even standing there, in a discreet corner of the party, he was still the center of everyone's attention. No one could ignore him, almost like a sun making everyone gravitate around him. And as a half-Vila, a race that fed on the magic of their partner to strengthen themselves, Asterion was like an unbelievably delicious cake to Apollon. She couldn't control herself very well around him, which was usually the opposite, it was men who couldn't control themselves around her. And that was because she was a half-Vila. If it were her mother, a full-blooded Vila, she would probably have jumped on him a long time ago. Ignoring the almost hungry look of the married woman, Asterion suddenly asked a question, surprising Apollon. In your eyes, as a half-Vila, how do you see the world? His calm voice reached her ears, and his eyes, the most beautiful she had ever seen, looked directly at her. Apollon was stunned for a moment. She never imagined she would hear such a question from anyone, especially from a wizard, particularly one so extremely powerful. Hesitating for the first time, Apollon looked directly into those red eyes and replied sincerely, with a touch of self-deprecation. A cold and cruel world. Although I am half-human, no one really sees me as human. I am just a half-breed in the eyes of all the wizards and witches in the world. Do you see yourself as human? Asterion asked again, once more leaving Apollon stunned by the nature of the question. Yes. After a brief pause, Apollon responded firmly. If you believe that, then you are human. You don't need anyone saying otherwise. Caring about what others say makes you weak and vulnerable. Asterion spoke, his voice calm and even indifferent, yet for some reason, it made Apollon bite her lips, looking at him with a very complex expression. Why am I not 20 years younger? Apollon murmured to herself, looking at the young man with a touch of passion growing in her eyes. Now she understood her youngest daughter. Gabrielle, it wasn't just the magical energy attracting her, but his character and personality were equally unique. Seeing the increasingly heated gaze of the married woman, Asterion's lips twitched abnormally. He had just stated the obvious and didn't understand why she was looking at him like a lovesick maiden. Your husband doesn't seem to mind you being surrounded by other men. Asterion skillfully changed the subject, feeling that the atmosphere around him was becoming increasingly ambiguous, especially the expression on the French First Lady's face. It was not an expression a married woman should show another man. Placing a gloved hand on his arm, Apollon laughed gracefully and responded with a subtle flirt. We have a rather open relationship. French? Asterion couldn't help but snort, understanding the essence of the relationship between the French Minister of Magic and his wife. Apollon merely laughed at Asterion's snort, finding it incredibly cute that he reacted that way. Suddenly, Apollon noticed the Russian Minister of Magic, Dmitry Ivanov, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. I won't bother you any longer, Lord Black. As a mature woman, Apollon almost immediately understood what was happening and bid farewell with an elegant smile, leaving with a deliberate sway of her hips. She laughed over her shoulder, seeing Asterion's gaze on her backside. Letting out a relieved sigh, Asterion couldn't help but curse how beautiful Apollon was. Even with Baskerville, he was still subtly fascinated by the charm of the half-Vila. Niais Black. Ivanov greeted Asterion and handed him a glass of champagne. Asterion didn't mind Ivanov's use of the High Russian noble term. In a sense, he was indeed a prince. Minister Ivanov. Asterion politely greeted the Russian Minister of Magic in return. Although Ivanov appeared to be a large and brainless individual, the Black Heir knew that to remain at the top of the snake pit that was Russia, brute strength alone wouldn't suffice for Ivanov to survive in that cold country. At the same time, Asterion could feel discreet glances falling upon him and the Russian Minister of Magic. I'll be direct, Niais Black, Ivanov said, his tone serious and formal. I believe that an alliance between our countries is in our mutual interests. The words of the Russian Minister of Magic truly surprised Asterion. He blinked a few times, trying to understand if he had heard the Russian Minister of Magic correctly. Asterion's brain was working at full speed, trying to comprehend the consequences of such actions at such a public event. You are indeed direct, Minister Ivanov. As Asterion was about to respond, he heard the voice of another man approaching. Seeing who had arrived, Ivanov's face darkened almost instantly. Benjamin Thorne, President of MACUSA. Looking at both special-grade wizards, Asterion felt like a puzzle had been completed in his mind. Russia and the United States. After the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, present-day Russia was now more fragmented than ever and without allies, especially in Europe, where everyone hated the socialist regime. The United States naturally didn't want its old mortal enemy to recover so quickly and ally with England. Still, Asterion was curious. The United States was currently recovering from the Cold War and the Persian Gulf War. If another war happened, the people would definitely be furious with the state. I don't think it's any of your business, Benjamin. The Russian minister spoke rudely, not bothering to show a bit of respect for the MACUSA leader. Still holding a grudge about our fight, Ivanov. The MACUSA president's smile remained unchanged in the face of the Russian minister's words. Grudge? You should be the one holding a grudge, after all, your wife certainly remembers me. Since you couldn't satisfy her. Ivanov spoke with a sarcastic smile, his voice intentionally loud, making sure everyone heard his words very clearly. The smile on Benjamin's face disappeared at his old rival's words. Ex-wife, and you were a coward for going after my wife. With the words of the Macusa president, a tense atmosphere began to settle over the party hall. The other ministers of magic from other countries watched the show with smiles, interested in the argument between the two special grade wizards. Chapter 109 Party 2. This is good, Apollon heard her husband whisper as he watched the argument between the two powerful countries. She understood her husband's mentality: if Russia allied with England, the United States would ally with France. This had always been the global scenario the United States wanted in Europe, with both sides maintaining a certain balance in case of war, and Louis deeply agreed with this. As long as France was safe from any future attack by Grindelwald, Louis was even willing to ally with their former enemies England. Only Louis knew how stressful it was to be the French Minister of Magic. His people were the most protest-prone in the world, and his presidential throne seemed like a throne of dynamite ready to explode at the slightest mistake. Next to Louis, Apollon couldn't help but remember the events that forced this party to take place in the first place: Gellert Grindelwald, the powerful seer and Dark Lord. But looking at what was happening now, everyone had forgotten about Grindelwald and were focusing on securing allies. It was almost as if a war was about to break out at any moment. Minister Ivanov, President Benjamin, I don't think this is the place for a discussion of your caliber. Seeing the magical auras of the two special grade wizards begin to manifest, making the air heavier and the weaker guests pale, Asterion decided to intervene by manifesting his own aura. After all, if a fight broke out, it would be a slap in the face to the host of the party, which meant a slap in the face to him. A tremendous amount of magical energy spread throughout the surroundings. All the special grade wizards and witches present instantly focused on Asterion, all with complex expressions. The absurd amount of magical energy they were feeling almost made their eyes widen in shock. Even veterans like Ivanov and Benjamin focused on Asterion, their eyes becoming more serious and respectful. In the end, strength was still the oldest and strongest form of dialogue in humanity. With the accidental display of strength by the three countries England, Russia, and the United States, the entire party was almost instantly reorganized. The only country left out was Brazil, which was to be expected for a generally neutral country. After all, if you don't attack me, I won't attack you. The country had only come to participate in the international tournament of magic and wizardry. You're lucky we're in England, Benjamin. Seeing the countries conversing among themselves, Ivanov couldn't help but curl his lips in a satisfied smile. I would say that you're the lucky one, Dmitri. Benjamin also smiled satisfactorily and countered his old rival's words with the same intensity. The two stared at each other with intensity, but their smiles indicated they were both very happy at that moment. Asterion looked at both with a calm gaze and couldn't help but curse how cunning these two old foxes were. He finally realized their plans, but in the end, he said nothing and remained silent, as their strategy indirectly helped England. Especially seeing the Japanese minister approaching him. Asterion-sama. Satoshi Nakamura, the Japanese minister of magic, greeted politely, bowing to Asterion. Nakamura-sama. Asterion returned the greeting with a smile. Japan was an important ally in case a war broke out. As Japan approached, Spain and Sweden also drew closer. Italy, which Asterion thought wouldn't come after the events of the Seven Powers War, unexpectedly approached him as well. But he soon understood the Italian Minister of Magic's reasoning: there were no special grade wizards in Italy at the moment, which meant the whole country was weak compared to the surrounding nations, and this was extremely concerning when it came to commercial interests and protection. Although it was impossible to form an alliance with these countries with just one conversation, everything starts with a conversation. At least, the first step was taken. That was intense. Fleur commented, using her hand to fan herself, a rosy color staining her cheeks as she watched all the governments conversing among themselves. The magical energy in the air seemed so delicious to her. The 17-year-old's blue eyes fell on Asterion. Being 1/4 Vila, Fleur didn't need to absorb magical energy like her mother, but she could still feel how delicious it would be to absorb Asterion's magical energy. Phew phew phew. Apollon, next to her daughter, just laughed and looked at Asterion with a gaze a bit warmer than before. Then, her gaze fell on her younger daughter, and seeing Gabrielle's eyes glued to Asterion, Apollon couldn't help but tease her. Dear, if you keep looking at him so intently, he'll evaporate from the earth. Gabrielle rolled her eyes at her mother and didn't care about the teasing. In her eyes, there was only Asterion and no one else. Classical music began to play, and everyone found their partners and started dancing in the center of the hall. Seeing Asterion's tired face, Narcissa couldn't help but approach and offer a glass of chilled champagne. "Thank you, Sissy." Asterion took the glass and drank, moistening his dry throat from all the talking. He never thought a conversation could be so difficult, especially when it involved other countries. "How is it going?" Narcissa asked, looking at everyone dancing in the center of the hall. "It's going well, especially with Russia, but if we ally with Russia, the United States will become our enemy." Asterion spoke in a tired tone, weary of the constant conflicts between the two countries. If he allied with one, the other would automatically become his enemy. It was exhausting, both countries seemed like children fighting over a toy. "Let's talk while we dance," Asterion said, extending his hand, which Narcissa took with a smile, and both went to the dance floor. Holding Narcissa's waist, Asterion pulled her close, and they began to dance. "What do you think of France?" Asterion whispered, tightening his grip on Narcissa's waist as they twirled, passing by other couples dancing in the center of the hall. "The French Minister of Magic seems too naive, especially seeking an alliance with Germany. The French will hate allying with those who invaded and occupied them." Narcissa leaned closer to Asterion's ear and whispered back, glancing at the French couple who were the center of attention. Asterion nodded but didn't completely agree with Narcissa's words. The man was naive in certain matters, but he was still a politician who had reached the position of Minister of Magic, the pinnacle of power in an entire country. He didn't think Louis was foolish, especially with his political career at stake. On second thought, France and Germany allied could make many countries' nerves tense. If someone adds a bit of fuel and lights a match, maybe the Third World War will start. Asterion spoke with a calm and profound look as his steps synchronized with Narcissa's. Narcissa showed a worried expression and nodded, focusing on the dance, though the concern on her face did not disappear. "Don't worry, Sissy. Even if a war begins, I will protect you and all of England," Asterion said after seeing the worry on his cousin's face. "I know, I'm just concerned about another war. If it happens, it will be the third in less than 2 decades. I'm tired of all these deaths." Leaning on his shoulder, Narcissa spoke with a melancholic tone. Asterion remained silent, and both continued to dance among many other couples to the gentle classical music. Chapter 110, Back to Hogwarts, 1. After a long day at the clock tower, Asterion returned to the Black Mansion. Almost all the matters concerning the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft were resolved, and everything was ready to begin. All the nations that had come to England agreed to participate in the event, the only thing left was to prepare the venue for the tournament. This was excellent news. The International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft was a perfect event to showcase the superiority of the clock tower to the citizens, demonstrating that they were fit to replace the old Ministry of Magic. Walking through the mansion's corridors, only Asterion's footsteps echoed in the air. His red eyes seemed to glow, and a black pentagram revealed itself in his eyes. Upon reaching the entrance hall, Asterion's red eyes fell upon the statue of his ancestor, Corvinus Black. The ruby eyes of the statue seemed to look down on him, as if evaluating something. "Nothing more fitting than using the cursed spirit that started it all," Asterion murmured, looking at the statue, his gaze full of expectation. He was ready to carry out the millennia-old plan of his ancestors, or at least, a prototype of it. Creating a god directly was impossible, but the first step was about to be realized, something his ancestors never managed to achieve. The innate Slytherin house technique was essential for making something like this possible. The imperfect destruction of truth had greatly helped Asterion process the insane amounts of information. After all, a melody signifying omnipotence and omniscience was not something he could conceive on his own. But, looking at the statue before him, Asterion felt something disturbing. Sealed inside the statue was a cursed spirit so powerful that he wondered how much hatred and resentment Corvinus must have felt to unconsciously transform his own sister into a cursed spirit. Asterion had tried to find records about Corvinus's sister, but the man had intentionally erased them all. If it weren't for Herpo, whom he presumed was using Mustafa's body, he would never have thought that this cursed spirit was also his ancestor. Touching the cold body of the statue, Asterion felt a chill run down his spine. He could hear a faint, powerful heartbeat, which in itself showed how special the sealed cursed spirit was. In his shadow, Asterion could hear the calls of Baskerville, urging him to stay away from it, warning that there was something very dangerous within the statue. This made Asterian's lips curl into a satisfied smile. The more powerful the cursed spirit, the easier it would be to execute his house's ancestral plan. The world no longer needed cursed spirits, and it was time for them to cease to exist. "Master, what are you doing?" Asterian heard Bellatrix's voice behind him. Turning around, he couldn't help but curl his lips abnormally while observing his cousin. Bellatrix was covered in blood from head to toe, her green eyes looking especially malevolent at that moment. In her hands was a naked, bloodied man whom she was dragging by the hair. The poor wretch was pleading with his eyes for death, something Asterian chose to ignore. The man Bellatrix was torturing was no saint, on the contrary, he was the highest level of human scum, a serial rapist. "Nothing, just thinking about our ancestor," Asterian replied to Bellatrix's question, walking towards her and wiping a splatter of blood from her cheek. "He must have been crazy. Look at how our family is." Bellatrix narrowed her eyes, very pleased with his act of wiping the blood, and replied cheerfully, her voice so happy it didn't seem like she had been torturing someone moments ago. At that moment, the man she was holding by the hair thrashed violently upon hearing her cheerful tone, as if to say otherwise, which made Bellatrix's face change from happy to a terrifying look in less than a second. "Move again and I'll make you swallow your own dick, muggle scum," she said cruelly, with sadism in her voice, and kicked his body violently with her high heel. Watching Bellatrix act like herself made Asterian roll his eyes at the hypocrisy of her words and actions. Calling someone crazy while being crazy was indeed very credible. "But, master, you lie very badly," said Bellatrix, stopping her kicking and smiling innocently. She looked at Asterian with her enigmatic green eyes. Facing those green eyes, Asterian remained silent and just shrugged. He walked towards his room. Seeing Asterian walking to his room, Bellatrix's eyes lit up. But before she could be happy, Asterian's voice reached her ears. "My door will be locked, Bellatrix." The happy look turned into sadness, almost like a puppy abandoned by its owner. Then Bellatrix's eyes met those of her victim. "Since I can't have a pleasurable night, you'll have a very painful one," she whispered, dragging the man by the hair to her private basement, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Hogwarts. Watching the visibly more excited students passing by her, Rose showed a satisfied smile. She preferred the school atmosphere this way rather than the palpable tension left by the attack. Everyone seemed eager about the upcoming International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft, which would be hosted at Hogwarts. Today was also a special day. Asterian would be returning to Hogwarts after long months of only seeing him through a page in a magical newspaper. Trying to change that indifferent expression of his had almost become a ritual for her. Although he had been somewhat distant since she began training with Dumbledore, Rose didn't think something like that would drive her cousin away from her. After all, she wasn't his enemy. Humming, Rose walked, feeling the changes after her enlightenment, as she called it. After having her body almost stolen by Voldemort, for the first time in her life, she felt an extremely fatal danger. The fear and terror she experienced were unlike anything she had ever felt before. For the first time in her life, she felt she was no longer invincible. But during such a fatal situation, she finally discovered the missing number in her final equation, a small number that did things in her mind she had never imagined. The sensation of euphoria and the ecstasy of having the whole universe at her fingertips made her seem like a lunatic. Fortunately, after some time adapting to her enlightenment, the adrenaline in her body calmed down, and she returned to being a normal person, able to smile without seeming crazy or anything like that. Entering the Gryffindor common room, Rose spotted her best friend Hermione reading quietly. If there was anyone who loved knowledge as much as she did, it was the girl with brown hair. Although, perhaps it had something to do with Hermione's innate technique. Lying on the couch with her head resting on her friend's soft and comfortable thighs, Rose looked up at her, smiling. "You seem excited." Ignoring Rose on her thighs, Hermione spoke distractedly, turning the page, her brown eyes focused on every line written in the book. "Asterian is coming back to Hogwarts, my own." Rose replied nonchalantly, her red lips curving into a very beautiful smile. Just imagining reuniting with him after a few months apart made her very happy. She would enjoy every minute trying to change that indifferent expression on his face. Hermione blinked a few times upon hearing the news and finally took her focus off the book in her hands. The brown-haired girl couldn't help but look at her friend with a peculiar expression. "Is there something strange on my face?" Seeing the strange look on Hermione's face, Rose asked, confused, touching her face in search of something unusual. "You don't realize. Hermione was speechless at her best friend's innocent reaction. Realize what? Rose asked, even more confused. Nothing. Hermione rolled her eyes and said nothing about the obvious passion her friend felt for Asterion. Probably even a blind person could see that Rose was too happy about Asterion's arrival. Strange. Rose looked at Hermione with a puzzled expression but didn't ask further and relaxed on her thighs while humming a soft melody. Hermione just rolled her eyes again, thinking her friend was really in love and hadn't even realized it. Though she didn't think this passion would go far in the first place, not when Asterion had a fiancé who obviously liked him a lot. Chapter 111, Back to Hogwarts, 2. Seeing the enormous magical castle once again after months, Asterion couldn't help but compare it to how it was before the renovation following the attacks on Hogwarts. The castle had always been large, but now it was even bigger, resembling a giant mythical fortress atop a hill. Perhaps the hill itself had been enlarged to support the base of the enormous building. At least 5 more towers had been erected around the castle, linking to the original ones. From these towers, Asterion felt an abnormal amount of magical energy. Obviously, they were not just simple towers meant for decoration or astrology classes. They were true magical defense weapons powered by the infinite energy of the ley lines. Entering Hogwarts, Asterion noticed that the medieval armors were much larger and seemed to emanate a faint wave of magical energy. It seemed that not only the towers had been updated, the entire internal system had undergone a complete upgrade. As it was still early, there were hardly any students in the corridors. The ones he saw were returning from missions and looked exhausted, apparently having stayed up all night. Asterion greeted them with a nod and found the stairs. He descended to the lower floors and arrived in front of the entrance to the Slytherin common room. He said the password. Pure blood. The door seemed alive with a silver serpent sliding over it and opening, revealing the elegant luxury of the Slytherin common room. Nothing had changed, it looked the same as always, elegant, discreet, with the soft green light illuminating the room. His seat and Daphne's near the fireplaces were untouched and properly cleaned. For some reason, he felt relaxed entering the common room. He could understand why, even after graduating from Hogwarts, people still called themselves members of their own house. This was a second home for many, almost like a refuge. Asti. Asterion didn't even have time to react to the sudden voice before he was embraced forcefully, his arms instinctively wrapping around her waist firmly. Daph. Asterion spoke gently to the blonde woman in his arms, holding her face with his left hand and claiming her lips. Daphne surrendered completely to the kiss, wrapping her arms around his neck. For a woman in love, being away from her boyfriend was nothing short of torture. Their lips met repeatedly, each kissing the other avidly, like drinking water after a long drought. Pulling away, Asterion looked at his future wife and spoke playfully, "What a warm welcome." Daphne simply surrendered completely to the kiss, intertwining her arms around his neck. For a woman in love, being away from her boyfriend was no different from torture. Their lips met repeatedly, each kissing the other avidly, as if drinking water after a long drought. Parting their lips, Asterion looked at his future wife and said playfully, "What a warm reception. If you like it, I'll greet you like this every time." Daphne laughed and spoke seductively, whispering in his ear. Just as he was about to respond equally seductively, Asterion heard a fake cough coming from the stairs leading to the dormitories. Looking to the side, he saw Tracy Davis, Theodore Knott, and Blaise Zabinai looking provocatively at them. "I know you want to do it right here, but a room would be more appropriate, Asti." Tracy spoke provocatively, arms folded, her eyes shrewdly falling on Asterion and Daphne with amusement. "I'm glad to see you all are well." Asterion gestured for everyone to sit on the sofas. He himself sat in his seat. But instead of sitting in their own seats, Daphne sat on Asterion's lap with her arm around his neck. One of Asterion's hands held her waist while the other rested on her thigh. Ignoring the jealous look Tracy was giving her, Daphne asked what everyone wanted to know. "So, is it true about the tournament?" Tracy, Theodore, and Blaise looked eagerly at Asterion. "Yes, 12 magical schools from different parts of the world will gather at Hogwarts for the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft. It will be broadcast worldwide in real time." Asterion nodded, confirming the rumors, causing the 3 Slytherin members to gasp with excitement. Just the thought of being famous worldwide almost made Theodore jump with excitement. Though calmer than his friend, Blaise couldn't hide his excitement behind his calm expression. "Tell me we can enter the tournament?" Theodore asked, his voice trembling slightly with anticipation. Beside him, Tracy and Blaise also listened eagerly. Asterion rolled his eyes at these two excited teenagers and replied calmly, although it's not official yet, 4 representatives will be elected from the 4 Hogwarts houses. Obviously, I won't be participating in the tournament as a contestant. Upon hearing this, Theodore and Blaise looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. If an election were held, 6th and 7th year students would definitely garner support from all of Slytherin, rather than 2nd year students like them. After all, it was the most obvious and safe choice aside from Asterion himself. In an international competition held in their own country, the pressure was enormous to win. After all, they were at home. So, to play it safer, the veterans would definitely represent Slytherin in this competition, making it impossible for Theodore, Blaise, and Tracy to participate. Seeing the disappointed faces of all 3, Asterion said nothing to comfort them. He himself didn't want to risk it in such an important event. After all, if England lost at home, it would be quite a blow to the still unstable reputation of the newly created clock tower. Who do you think will be elected in the other houses? Seeing the subdued atmosphere, with a noble and intelligent air, Daphne changed the subject with a smile on her lips, subtly feeling her hands tighten on her waist and thigh. She could tell Asterion was much more interested in her than before, making her realize that this distance over the months hadn't been entirely bad. Hufflepuff will be Cedric Diggory, Tracy said without hesitation in her voice. She bit her lip, recalling the handsome young man with brown hair. Handsome, popular, and above all, powerful. Cedric practically screams protagonist in a book. Asterion's lips twitched hearing the name of the glittery vampire. He couldn't help but think of the boy's ultimate fate in the movies. Truly an ice guy protagonist, Asterion thought with an amused smile on his lips. As for Ravenclaw, I have no idea, but for Gryffindor, I would say Rose Potter, but since she's a special grade witch, she can't participate, Tracy continued, and everyone around agreed with her words. It was completely impossible for Rose to participate in the competition. She herself was the embodiment of cheating. Chapter 112 New Students, 1. September 1, 1994. Hogwarts, Great Hall. At the Slytherin table in the Great Hall, Asterion was chatting with his group, a calm and serene expression on his face. He lifted his coffee cup to his lips, showing a satisfied look. I'm excited for the new students, Tracy said next to Theodore, her words echoed by several people at the table. Astoria is finally joining Slytherin, Daphne added with a smile rarely seen by others. The thought of attending Hogwarts with her adorable sister was finally becoming a reality. Then, Daphne's gaze fell on Draco, like a queen looking at her subject sharp and powerful. If I hear that you did anything to Astoria, believe me when I say you might not have descendants in the future, Heir Malfoy. Faced with that look and those harsh words, Draco swallowed hard and gave a rather nervous smile. He clenched his legs tightly together while nodding repeatedly. Theodore and Blaise couldn't help but shrink back at the cruel words of the teenager and looked at Draco with pity. Doria, who was beside Daphne, didn't even glance at her brother. Asterion noticed this but said nothing. Anyone could see that the twins were fighting. Suddenly, Daphne felt eyes on her. Turning her face, she saw a pair of incredibly blue eyes staring at her intensely. Rose Potter. Daphne's lips curved into a smile. Although she couldn't beat the girl, she could make her feel something much more painful than the bitter taste of defeat. Under the surprised eyes of everyone at the table, the Slytherin queen sat in her special seat, which was her boyfriend's lap, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Then, with the wide eyes of the Slytherin table watching, Daphne lifted Asterion's chin and claimed the lips that were rightfully hers while looking at Rose with a sarcastic gaze. She knew Rose liked Asterion, so even if she couldn't win against Rose in a fight, the emotional damage she caused the girl by doing this was far greater than any physical harm. Crack! The fork and knife in Rose's hands snapped as if someone had broken a thin tree branch. Gritting her teeth, Rose had never held back so much from casting a red at someone as she did at that moment. Especially seeing that victorious, sarcastic look, as if to say, take a good look, because it's the only thing you'll ever get to do. Rose. Hermione, sitting next to her friend, looked at Rose in confusion and glanced at the broken cutlery with a bit of pity. Seeing Rose not responding, Hermione followed her gaze and saw Daphne and Asterion kissing publicly in the Great Hall. Hermione's mouth dropped open in shock. Don't they know it's forbidden to do that in public? She said incredulously, watching the intense kiss unfold. Her cheeks turned a rosy shade of embarrassment. Hermione had to take a sip of her juice to calm down after witnessing scenes she had only read about in her period romances, but Rose's next words made the young brunette spit out everything she was drinking. PFF. I've decided. I'm going to separate Asterion from that snake he calls a girlfriend. As his cousin, I have a responsibility to think about his well-being. Rose spoke each word through clenched teeth, the scene before her making her feel as if her heart was being bitten by several snakes at once, a sensation of anxiety and breathlessness she had never experienced before. Hermione wiped her mouth and looked incredulously at her friend, unable to believe how innocent Rose was in not recognizing her own jealousy. Don't get involved, Rose. You'll only start a war you don't want to fight. Hermione tried to reason with Rose, but seeing the determined look in her best friend's eyes, she could only give up for now. War? That's fine. Then let's go to war. Rose murmured, looking defiantly at Daphne still sitting on Asterion's lap, who returned her gaze with the same arrogant look. The two young women exchanged glances and smiled amicably at each other, as if nothing had happened between them. What was that? With Daphne still on his lap, Asterion asked, confused, holding his fiancée's waist. Nothing, I just felt like kissing you. Daphne looked at him innocently and responded in a sweet tone. Her glance shifted to the Gryffindor table, where Rose's furious face made her feel like she was floating on cloud nine. She had never been more satisfied in her life than she was today. Doria and Tracy looked bitterly at the couple, their expressions tinged with resentment. The worst pain for a friend is to see their friend dating while they remain alone in a corner, watching everything with envy. That was the situation the two young women were currently in. Professor McGonagall is looking at our table with a glare that could kill someone, Theodore said, pointing to the teacher's table, where the Transfiguration professor was glaring at the Slytherin table with a sharp and very severe look. Daphne just smiled gently at the professor and acted as if nothing had happened. She sat back down on the bench next to Asterion, intertwining her arms with his. Although still dissatisfied with the situation, Professor McGonagall decided to address it later. She left the teacher's table and walked toward the exit of the Great Hall, ready to fetch the new students for this year. She's definitely going to punish us with a lot of homework, Tracy murmured with a disheartened look on her face. The memory of the amount of homework she had last year sent a chill down her spine. Don't be dramatic. She would have done that even without any punishment, Doria responded with a very cold attitude, almost like Narcissa. After the attack on Hogwarts last year, all the teachers had doubled the amount of exercises and lessons, and everyone was exhausted from such a grueling routine. Many newcomers were dissatisfied with these changes, especially the Gryffindor members, but many also didn't complain, feeling that they were getting stronger with each week of classes since last year. Suddenly, the doors of the Great Hall opened, and Professor McGonagall, dressed in her classic emerald robes, entered the hall, followed by a long line of new students. Daphne soon spotted her sister, Astoria, among the descendants of other noble houses, mainly talking to another teenager with long black hair and red eyes. Red eyes? Red eyes. Daphne's eyes widened as she saw the familiar red eyes on the girl next to her sister. By Morgana's saggy bosom, what is happening? Daphne murmured, looking incredulously at the pale-skinned girl with long black hair and red eyes. The girl's eyes also caught the attention of many people, both at the students' tables and the teachers' table. Dumbledore looked at Asterion and then at the girl with a puzzled expression. Both bore striking similarities, almost as if they were twins. Chapter 113 New Students, 2. Seeing Daphne's reaction, Asterion grew curious and followed her gaze. His eyes almost immediately fell on the girl with black hair and red eyes. He blinked a few times, trying to understand if he was seeing correctly, but even after blinking, the girl remained there. Frowning, Asterion tried to sense any cursed spirit within the girl, but found no trace of negative magical energy in her. The girl definitely didn't possess the Black family technique, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits. He would have sensed any cursed spirit in her. But her features practically screamed black from every angle, she even had certain similarities to him. Daughter of Sirius. This was the only possibility Asterion could think of upon seeing the girl next to his sister-in-law. Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on the stool. The hat, in turn, began to sing a song about how amazing and handsome it was. If there was truly anyone arrogant at Hogwarts, it was the sorting hat. Looking helplessly at the supreme creation of the Hogwarts founders, Minerva took a deep breath and focused. She picked up a parchment and unfolded it, reading the first name in her mind. She opened her mouth and spoke aloud. Weasley, Ginevra. At the professor's call, a red-haired girl with a shy expression stepped out of the crowd of first years and quickly reached the chair, sitting down. Not even 5 seconds passed before the Sorting Hat announced its decision. Slytherin. The Weasley twins' mouths dropped open in shock. They looked at each other and asked simultaneously. Did you hear that right, Fred? Did you hear that right, George? They continued to stare at each other in shock before turning to see their sister, still stunned in the chair, the color drained from her face. Even Minerva looked at the Weasley girl with a surprised expression but didn't show much importance to it. Compared to Sirius Black being sorted into Gryffindor, this was less shocking. Miss Weasley, please proceed to your designated house table. Professor McGonagall spoke in a serious and slightly reprimanding tone, seeing the girl still stunned in the chair. Ginny nodded and climbed down from the chair, walking to the Slytherin table with stiff steps while murmuring repeatedly, I'm dead. Mom and Dad are going to kill me. The Slytherins, although surprised by the arrival of the youngest Weasley, all clapped with great elegance, leaving Ginny even more shocked by the unexpectedly warm reception. She had expected disdainful looks or insulting words, but looking around, everyone seemed not to care much about her arrival. Asterion nodded in satisfaction. It seemed his words at the beginning of last year had had a positive effect, especially after the invasion of Hogwarts, where the Slytherin students had defended the school alongside all the other houses. This had restored the resentment against Slytherin to mere rivalries among the 4 houses. Welcome, Miss Weasley. I hope your stay in Slytherin is pleasant, Daphne greeted the red-haired girl with an elegant and kind look, putting the youngest Weasley completely at ease. Thank you, Miss Greengrass, Ginny replied with a very flattered tone. Even without attending Hogwarts, Ginny had heard about Daphne from her brothers the beautiful Queen of Slytherin. She completely agreed with their praises about Daphne's beauty. She truly looked like a Greek goddess. Hello, I'm Tracy Davis. I hope we get along well, Tracy laughed and greeted the newcomer after Daphne. Doria Malfoy, Doria said curtly and nodded amiably while remaining silent. Theodore Nott, the most handsome guy in Slytherin, Theodore introduced himself, raising his hand in the air. Ha ha ha, the entire Slytherin table laughed while Theodore showed clear dissatisfaction with everyone's laughter. Dare you point to anyone more handsome than me? He said with a mock-furious expression. Everyone pointed to Asterion, Draco, and Blaise. Theodore pretended to clutch his chest in pain and collapsed back onto the bench, powerless. Everyone laughed at Theodore's miserable appearance, including Asterion himself. Ginny also laughed and looked around at everyone laughing. For a moment, she didn't think it was so bad to be sorted into Slytherin. No one seemed like the people-eating demons her mother had warned her about while she was growing up. At the Gryffindor table, seeing their sister laughing and talking with other Slytherin girls, Fred and George's faces relaxed. As long as their sister could be happy, they didn't care if she was in Gryffindor or Slytherin. Ron, on the other hand, looked angrily at Ginny getting along with the snakes, as if he were looking at a traitor who had killed their parents. I'm going to tell Mom and Dad. Fred and George heard this and looked at their younger brother with dissatisfaction. No, you're not. If we find out you told, Fred said, and George finished the sentence, don't expect to sleep at night, because we'll be playing a lot of pranks on you. Foolish, said Fred. Stupid, said George. Brother, they finished together. Ron's face turned as red as his hair from anger, but the young Gryffindor lion remained silent under the intense gaze of the twins. Hermione, who was listening nearby, looked at Ron with disgust and turned away, fearing that even looking at him would dirty her eyes. Ron's behavior only confirmed her opinion of him. He was a spoiled and idealistic boy. As Hermione criticized all of Ron's flaws in her mind, Professor McGonagall continued her list calmly, calling out student after student. Greengrass, Astoria. Her loud voice echoed throughout the Great Hall. A 13-year-old girl with very pale skin and blonde hair stepped forward with calm steps and a confident smile on her lips, unaffected by the thousands of eyes falling on her. Seeing the girl sit in the chair, Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on her head, and it took less than 5 seconds for the hat to make its decision. Slytherin. Daphne's smile widened as she clapped, followed by the rest of Slytherin House. Astoria also smiled happily and walked over to the Slytherin table, where she sat next to Ginny Weasley. Welcome to Slytherin, Astoria, Daphne greeted her sister with a tone almost bursting with pride. It was clear that she was extremely pleased to have her sister with her in the best house at Hogwarts. Astoria was equally delighted to be in Slytherin. She would have felt isolated in any other house. As she greeted everyone, Her eyes fell on her new friend from the Hogwarts Express. Although she didn't care about the girl's family background, she knew the chances of her being sorted into Slytherin were slim at best. Asterian's eyes fell on the last girl who had not yet been sorted. Looking into her crimson eyes, he swore they seemed familiar somehow. Professor McGonagall looked at the final student and was surprised. She glanced at the parchment and her expression froze upon seeing the name. She rigidly looked at Dumbledore in the main seat for a moment before announcing the girl's name loudly. Riddle, Ofilia. The smile on Dumbledore's lips vanished for a moment, but he quickly resumed his usual calm demeanor. Asterian's gaze, on the other hand, turned icy cold. Slytherin. The Sorting Hat's voice echoed in Asterian's mind. He finally understood why the girl's eyes seemed so familiar. This girl was Voldemort's daughter. Chapter 116, Chapter 114 Ofilia, 1. Watching the girl walk towards the Slytherin table, Dumbledore saw the shadow of her father overlapping with the girl. A flash of concern reflected in his blue eyes but disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Rising from the head seat, the entire Great Hall suddenly fell silent. Dumbledore smiled at all his beloved students and began to speak, his voice reverberating through the hall. First, let us welcome all the new students. With his words, all the students started clapping, a barrage of applause sounding extremely loud, causing the new students to look at the headmaster with excitement. As the applause died down, Dumbledore continued speaking. Some rumors are circulating about a supposed tournament of magic and witchcraft. Dumbledore paused and looked at the visibly anxious and excited students with a smile, then continued, the rumors are true. Hogwarts will host the International Magic and Witchcraft Tournament. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall erupted into complete chaos, with screams of excitement and joy. Even the older students, accustomed to fighting cursed spirits, could not hide their excitement at this moment. We must win! Gryffindor shouted loudly, full of bravery. We will win with our minds. The Ravenclaw students, not wanting to be left behind, shouted together. We will win together. Hufflepuff shouted loudly. We will win at all costs. The Slytherin students followed suit and shouted loudly together. For the first time in hundreds of years, all four houses of Hogwarts seemed truly united for a moment. This made the professors look at each other in surprise and smile at one another. Seeing something like this brought a very pleasant feeling to them. Dumbledore smiled at the scene in front of him and resumed speaking when the applause and shouts ceased. 12 magical schools around the world will participate in the tournament. It has been decided that each school will present 4 representatives to compete in the international tournament. Dumbledore patiently explained a few things, and all the students listened attentively, afraid of missing any details. A selection will be held to decide each representative of Hogwarts. You will be able to vote for whom you believe can bring victory to Hogwarts. The date of the selection will be the same day all the schools arrive at Hogwarts. Dumbledore finished explaining and turned his gaze to the teacher's table, where a man in a beautiful blue suit and a charismatic smile stood up, drawing everyone's attention. Those who already recognized the man stood up and shouted, trying to get their idol's attention, especially the girls, who seemed to be seeing their god. Dumbledore looked at the blonde man with a deep gaze and announced with a smile, after the disappearance of Professor Quirinus, we are pleased to announce that Gilderoy Lockhart is our newest member of the Hogwarts Teaching Committee. He will assume the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor in place of Professor Quirinus. With that said, the headmaster of Hogwarts took the initiative to clap, followed by everyone else, welcoming the new professor to Hogwarts. Dumbledore sat back in his seat while bringing the metal goblet to his lips, watching Lockhart and narrowing his eyes thoughtfully. Thank you for the kind words, Professor Dumbledore. Gilderoy first thanked Dumbledore and then looked at all the students with a sense of pride. You are lucky to have the best teacher you could ever have. He began, causing some girls to scream with joy. Winking elegantly at the girls, Gilderoy continued speaking with a broad, impeccably white smile. I will fulfill the sacred duty of teaching young witches and wizards with all respect and pride. By the way, be sure to purchase the latest edition of my book, Vampires and Their Macabre Stories. Snape, at the teacher's table, scowled at the shamelessness of the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. His eyes, dark as 2 black holes, stared at Gilderoy with a touch of dissatisfaction. The other professors were also displeased that a peacock like Gilderoy had secured one of the most coveted positions in British magical society. At the Slytherin table, Asterian looked at the fraud with a hint of disgust in his eyes. Weak, Gilderoy was terribly weak, not even a level 2 wizard. At the same time, he wondered why Dumbledore had chosen such a worthless piece of trash to be a professor at Hogwarts, especially for one of the most important classes, defense against the dark arts. Sipping some wine from his goblet, Asterion looked at the man sitting in the head seat at the teacher's table, who seemed to feel his gaze and raised his goblet, greeting him with a smile. Asterion raised his own goblet and smiled back at the man over 100 years old. Then, his smile completely disappeared as his gaze fell upon the girl beside Astoria and Ginny, his supposed cousin Ofilia Riddle. Bellatrix had a daughter with Voldemort. That was the only possibility he could think of at that moment. But if such a thing happened, Bellatrix would certainly have told him. He did not doubt his mad cousin's loyalty. So, one option remained. Voldemort had used Obliviate on Bellatrix, making her forget she had a daughter with him. Only a powerful wizard like Voldemort could use Obliviate on an extremely powerful witch like Bellatrix Black. Any other wizard would have had their head ripped off before they could cast the spell on Bella. If it were true, then Ofilia was his cousin, and he had killed the girl's father. If Ofilia grew up without a father or mother, then Asterion was almost sure that Ofilia would hate him if she found out her true parentage. After all, only an orphan or someone abandoned knows how lonely it is to grow up without someone by their side. Any orphan yearning for parental love would give anything to grow up with their parents, regardless of whether those parents were good or bad. Love truly was an extremely complicated feeling. Suddenly, Asterion felt a delicate hand intertwine with his. He turned his head and saw Daphne looking at him with a calm and somewhat concerned expression. "You seem worried," Daphne whispered, gazing at him with her beautiful icy blue eyes. It was the first time she had seen such an expression on her fiancé, who had always been confident and calm in any situation. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew it had something to do with the new Slytherin student Ofilia Riddle. The resemblance between Asterion and Ofilia was obvious, all the Slytherins had noticed it, but no one said anything to avoid creating an awkward atmosphere. "Come to my room tonight, and I'll tell you everything," Asterion whispered, deciding to tell Daphne about Voldemort's true identity. Letting out a tired sigh, he felt that the coming days would be stressful, but first, he needed to talk privately with Ofilia and question her amicably. Daphne nodded and asked no more questions. She began to lift the atmosphere at the table with a few words, making it more lively and relaxed for the new freshmen. With the end of Gilderoy's presentation, dinner was served, appearing suddenly on the table, shocking the new Muggle-born students. They were still amazed by this new magical and beautiful world, but they didn't know that behind this beauty lay a very cruel and cold world. But that they would have to face at another time. For now, everyone focused on the delicious food on the tables, enjoying the most magical moment of their lives. Chapter 115 Ofilia, 2. The entire ceremony for the new students ended, and the house monitors led the new students to their respective houses, heading toward their common rooms. The password to enter the common room is pure blood. Marcus Flint, who took over as the Slytherin monitors after his predecessor graduated, told all the new students. "Don't forget it, or you'll have to sleep outside or wait for someone to open the door for you." Beside him, guiding the girls, was Clarissa Higgs, the female Slytherin monitors who took over after her predecessor left. "Slytherin has strict rules, but you can read the rules in your respective dormitories," Ginny heard Clarissa say as she looked around, mouth agape, at the elegant and luxurious environment of the common room. Glancing out the window, she swore she saw a huge octopus tentacle appear for a moment. "Are all the common rooms like this?" Still shocked by the luxurious appearance of the place, Ginny asked her new friend, Astoria, who was beside her. "From what my sister said, each common room is unique in its own way, but only Slytherin's is this rich. We have individual or double rooms if 2 people want to share. In Gryffindor, you have to share the room with 4 or 5 other girls," Astoria replied in a whisper, her tone full of pride for Slytherin. Mentioning Gryffindor, Astoria herself felt a shiver run down her spine. Just thinking about sharing her own room with other people without a hint of privacy left a rich girl like her very uncomfortable. Although she felt she wouldn't be too bothered by sharing a room with other girls, Ginny still nodded while continuing to look around the common room with great curiosity. Her gaze finally fell upon 2 chairs that resembled thrones next to the fireplace. Something that the new students also looked at with curiosity. After all, were 2 thrones, even for the descendants of minor noble houses, it was something they had never seen before. Marcus Flint, seeing the looks from the new boys and girls, smiled and proudly introduced, "These are the seats of Lord Asterion Black and his fiancée, Lady Daphne Greengrass." He seemed so proud that one might think he was talking about himself. The name of Asterion filled all the descendants of the minor noble houses with admiration and envy. After all, it was the name of the war hero who defeated the most evil wizard ever to set foot in Britain. Hearing her sister's name, Astoria couldn't help but look with envy at the silver throne beside the black throne. Every girl was vain and very proud, always wanting to be the center of attention. She was no different in that regard, but Astoria knew she could never surpass her sister's popularity. Clarissa Higgs, the female Slytherin monitor, spoke at this moment, looking at the 13-year-old girls. Girls can enter the boys' dormitory, but boys cannot enter the girls' dormitory, so no bringing boys into the girls' dormitory. Why would we bring boys into the girls' dormitory? Ginny asked, confused by the rather specific rule. Beside her, Astoria looked speechlessly at the innocent red-headed teenager. Isn't it obvious? What's obvious? Ginny asked, genuinely confused, looking at Astoria. Seeing those innocent eyes, Astoria was at a loss for words. Had her mother not talked to her about these things? Though surprised, Astoria didn't answer. She didn't want to tarnish the girl's innocence but thought it would be amusing to see her reactions when she found out about these things. When everyone was about to head to their respective dormitories, Asterion's voice drew everyone's attention. Marcus, Clarissa. Miss Riddle will stay with me for a moment. Asterion, who had just arrived in the common room, looked at the girl with black hair and red eyes. Marcus and Clarissa weren't surprised by Asterion's arrival. It was obvious given Ophilia's appearance that this would happen. Looking at Ofilia, who didn't object, Marcus and Clarissa nodded and led the new students to the dormitories. Astoria and Ginny looked at their friend with concern for a second but followed Clarissa to their rooms. Observing the boy sitting on the black throne by the fireplace, Ophilia's crimson eyes met his ruby ones. The notable resemblance between them had not escaped her since the moment she laid eyes on him. Miss Riddle. His voice, though calm, was as confused as she felt in this strange moment. Even though she was new to this world that had just opened its doors to her, Ofilia knew the identity of the handsome boy in front of her. Asterion Black. There were as many rumors about him as mushrooms sprouting after rain. A powerful special grade wizard, though she didn't fully understand what that meant, she knew the young man before her was someone powerful in this magical world. And for some reason, given how similar they looked, this powerful figure had some blood relation to her, bringing conflicting feelings to the teenager's mind. Growing up alone for 13 years in a wealthy orphanage, believing she was alone in the world, it was a surprise to know she had some relative. This brought mixed feelings of joy and fear to her heart. Joy at knowing she wasn't alone and fear that it was just a coincidence they looked so alike. Believe me, I am more surprised than you are. Noticing the negative emotions growing within the girl as she looked at him, Asterion spoke calmly, waking her from her thoughts. Your appearance indicates that we are related, of that I have no doubt. This leads me to know who your parents are. Asterion spoke calmly, looking at the very nervous girl. The girl seemed to relax with his words and looked at him with obvious joy, and probably many questions on her mind. I grew up in a very wealthy orphanage in West Yorkshire. I don't know who my parents are, but the headmaster of the orphanage said he found me in a basket on a winter night with a note bearing my name. Ofilia spoke each word without hesitation, her voice much happier as she looked at Asterion with a bright gaze. Their similar appearances made her feel an almost instant connection, knowing they were related. A wealthy orphanage? Does such a thing exist anywhere? Voldemort probably created a false orphanage to raise his own daughter in secret, something ironic given that he was also raised in an orphanage. Asterion thought, looking strangely at the girl. Observing her confident and cheerful aura, he confirmed his thoughts. Orphans usually don't possess much of that while growing up, not only due to the bullying they suffer but also due to the less than luxurious conditions given the number of children an orphanage raises. Tell me about your childhood. Asterion crossed his legs and placed his hands on his knees. Any information about her would be useful in determining some questions in his mind. Chapter 116 Doubts, 1. Watching Ophelia practically bouncing with joy as she headed towards the girls' dormitory, Asterion narrowed his eyes and displayed a thoughtful expression. Throughout the entire conversation he had with the girl, he had been looking for any sign of pretense or lies on her part. After all, she was Voldemort's daughter, a man who had raised her in secret, and he didn't want to risk being stabbed in the back when he least expected it. Asterion had orchestrated Voldemort's own downfall. It would be poetically ironic if the daughter of the man he had killed did something similar to him. That was an experience he definitely did not want to have in his life. But if Ofilia had been pretending to be someone else the whole time during their conversation, Asterion assumed she should have gone to the United States, where she would have made a great career as an actress. She would definitely win a golden Oscar statue. Raising a hand to his forehead, Asterion couldn't help but think how things got more complicated when his family was involved. He couldn't simply kill Ofilia, not when she was possibly Bellatrix's daughter. Although Asterion didn't doubt for a second that Bellatrix would agree to kill Ofilia if he ordered it. His cousin was a fanatic lunatic who placed him on a pedestal on the same level as God. For a moment, Asterion felt a bit sorry for Ofilia. The girl didn't yet know that both her parents were, in a way, crazy in their own ways, especially her mother, who was completely insane. Suddenly, Asterion's shadow rippled, and a small dog with hundreds of eyes emerged from it, jumping into his lap. It rubbed against him affectionately while looking at him with its many eyes. A hint of amusement flashed in Asterion's eyes as he slowly petted his faithful companion. Holding Baskerville in his arms, Asterion rose from his seat and headed towards the boys' dormitory. He needed a drink to relax a bit. In his room, Asterion was shirtless, sitting in his armchair, holding a glass of whiskey with ice. Curiously, he didn't like magical drinks full of bubbles and too much sparkle. He preferred muggle alcoholic beverages. They were not only tastier but also much easier to obtain. Baskerville lay next to the armchair, its hundreds of eyes roaming the room, ready to ensure its master's safety at any moment. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Daphne entered, dressed in classic Slytherin attire, a green skirt, a white blouse with the Slytherin crest, and a green tie. Technically, the doors to all the rooms at Hogwarts were magically protected with powerful spells, only the owners had permission to open and close them, something Asterion had given to Daphne. Seeing her fiancé shirtless and drinking slowly in the armchair, Daphne's eyes wandered first over his abdomen, and her gaze slowly rose. She approached with quick steps and sat on the armrest of the chair, looking at her fiancé with a smile on her lips. "So, what did you want to tell me?" she asked in a calm voice, her eyes shining with curiosity. Rolling his eyes, Asterion pulled Daphne into his arms, making her sit on his lap facing him. Holding her waist firmly, he kissed her chin while locking eyes with her. "Apparently, your father never told you Voldemort's real name," he said between the kisses he placed on her neck and face, leaving slightly red marks on her skin with his actions. His hands sank even deeper into the flesh of her waist. Daphne only let out a muffled sound, agreeing with his words, her eyes closed, enjoying the gentle caresses on her skin. She moved her neck to the side, giving him more space to do as he pleased. Daphne could imagine that the hickeys and kisses would leave marks on her skin the next morning. Although it would be a bit embarrassing to be seen with something like this, it would be interesting to see Rose's face. Before assuming his name as Voldemort, he was known as Tom Marvolo Riddle. The son of Mary P. Gaunt and Tom Riddle, a muggle whom Mary P. fell in love with and used some questionable means to make him fall in love with her, Asterion said, looking into Daphne's eyes. He could see her face was slightly red, and she was breathing heavily. The desire in her eyes was as clear as knowing the sun would rise the next day. Daphne's desire-filled eyes widened, recalling Ofilia's surname. She quickly connected the dots and understood the core of the matter. Remembering the girl's appearance, the image of Bellatrix came to her mind. After all, she was the only woman from the House of Black who had been with Voldemort during his reign 13 years ago. Bellatrix and Voldemort, Daphne murmured to herself, looking at Asterion with curiosity. Asterion nodded and claimed Daphne's lips in an enveloping kiss. Daphne's thoughts almost immediately focused on Asterion, feeling the touch of his lips. She set aside any shocking news like this and fully surrendered to the kiss. She wrapped her arms around his neck and gently ground her hips on his lap. She could feel something hard growing beneath her, and it made her happy, at least she was attractive in his eyes. "Asterion, I think I'm ready." Breaking the kiss, Daphne, who was extremely close to Asterion's lips, whispered breathlessly, her eyes burning with desire. Asterion nodded and caught his breath from the prolonged kiss. "How about I prepare a special night for us?" Daphne felt her heart submerge in an ocean of sweetness hearing that. Any other man would have jumped at her after hearing her previous words, but her fiancé wanted to prepare a special night for her. This only made the love she felt for him grow even more, if that was possible in her mind. "No, let me prepare our night. If I leave it to you, you might decorate the entire mansion with silly flowers." Letting out a low laugh, Daphne smiled and spoke, pressing her forehead against his. Thinking about the idea, Daphne couldn't help but laugh again as her hands caressed his visibly defined chest. No matter how much she touched, she never got tired of those beautiful muscles. Asterion rolled his eyes at her words. He wouldn't do something as tacky as putting flowers on the bed. He was a much simpler and more elegant man, a candlelit dinner was enough in his eyes. But Asterion didn't retort Daphne's words at that moment, not when she returned to kissing him again with even greater intensity. Honestly, he admired his own self-control, otherwise, he would already be in bed with Daphne, making her a real woman at this moment. Chapter 117 Humbug 1. Ginny was surprised that she was sharing a room with Ofilia, but she didn't complain, on the contrary, she was very happy to have someone in the room with her. It was her first time living alone in an unfamiliar place, and she felt it would be difficult to sleep alone. Looking at the room that could only be worthy of a princess from the stories she had read, Ginny gasped with happiness. The entire room was decorated with beautiful white wallpaper with gold accents, a canopy bed with green sheets, a lovely dresser with snakes carved into the wood, and an absolutely wonderful wardrobe. Thinking of her room at home and looking at the room before her, Ginny let go of any reservations about not going to Gryffindor. Even if her mother kicked her out of the house, she would never leave this room. Jumping onto the bed, Ginny looked at the smile on Ophelia's face on the bed next to her and asked curiously. "You seem so happy, Ofilia." Ofilia laughed and played with her hair, twirling it around her finger. She turned her gaze to her new friend and replied with a smile. "Asterion and I are relatives." Ginny stopped jumping on the bed and went to her friend's bed extremely quickly, her eyes shining with curiosity and admiration. "Amazing! You're related to the most famous wizard in Britain." Ofilia felt her cheeks warm at Ginny's words. She also thought she was dreaming and that all this was a dream, but remembering the conversation she had, her lips curved into a very happy smile. "Tell me everything," Ginny said excitedly, all her shyness from the entrance ceremony completely gone. The next day. Defense against the dark arts classroom. Looking at Gilderoy Lockhart wearing a green suit and smiling brightly at the students from behind a desk, Asterion again showed a look of disgust on his face and didn't hide his animosity. The man was a fraud from head to toe. His very existence insulted the sacred profession of teaching. "You don't seem to like Professor Lockhart, Asti." Looking at the expression of disgust on Asterion's face, Tracy asked in a low tone from the back row of seats in the classroom. "He's a complete fraud, probably never faced a cursed spirit in his life, and wants to teach about defending against a dark wizard." Asterion replied, snorting coldly, his red eyes falling on Lockhart, who shuddered for some reason. Daphne, Tracy, Theodore, and Blaise were surprised. It was the first time they had seen Asterion dislike someone so much. And from his tone, they detected even disgust and disdain. "Are you saying the deeds in his books are fake?" Tracy asked, her voice lower than usual, her eyes wide with incredulity. As a fan of Gilderoy, Asterion's words were nothing short of heresy to her. The man is a level 3 wizard. Do you think someone like that can fight 5 vampires and come out alive? Older vampires are as fast as bullets from a muggle gun. Besides, look up his academic records in the library, and you'll see that the man was talented in memory charms. Asterion asked, sarcasm dripping from his voice. Tracy was completely petrified. She didn't want to believe his words, but Asterion was someone she truly respected. She didn't think he would have animosity towards someone without reason. But Gilderoy's next words completely shattered the hope that it was just a mistake on Asterion's part. "Dear students, today we will start with a test." "A very important test," Lockhart said, and with a wave of his wand, several sheets flew across the room and landed in front of each student. "A test about me," he said, showing his impeccably white teeth. "Whoever gets all the questions right will receive a personal autograph from me." Looking at the questions on the sheet, Tracy's eyes went lifeless. Even as a fan, she still had enough sense to understand that these ridiculous questions were nothing more than to inflate the professor's ego. Remembering the hours she spent reading Lockhart's books, Tracy clenched her fists tightly and glared furiously at the fraud. Taking the sheet, Asterion simply used a bit of magical energy and made the page combust, turning it into ashes in a second. The smell of burning made Lockhart's eyes fall on Asterion. Seeing the ashes on the desk, he understood what had happened, and when he was about to reprimand the student with a charismatic laugh, he felt a shiver run down his spine. Faced with those red eyes, Lockhart swallowed hard and showed a stiff smile to the young man with red eyes whom he finally recognized. Wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief he took from the upper pocket of his suit, he selectively ignored Asterion and continued teaching. Seeing Lockhart do nothing against him, Asterion showed a disappointed look. He was about to demonstrate how to really kill a vampire so Lockhart could learn personally. Unfortunately, the man recognized him before he could do anything. I bought all these stupid books at the beginning of the year because of him. Now I'm going to burn them all when I get back to my room, Tracy said, gritting her teeth. The pain of spending so much money on books from a charlatan caused a pang in the heart of the teenager who believed in her idol. As the saying goes, never meet your idols, or you might be disappointed. Don't worry, at least we have Asterian's private lessons. Otherwise, we'd be just like the other houses stuck learning from Quirinus. And now, Lockhart, Daphne reassured her friend, hugging her arm. Tracy's face brightened considerably upon hearing this. Indeed, future classes with Lockhart would be a joke compared to Asterian's, a special grade wizard. For other houses, having private lessons with Asterian was something they could only dream of. But for Slytherin, it wasn't an unreal dream. They had one lesson a week with a true special grade wizard. Oh, looks like we have a celebrity in our class, the girl who survived. Lockhart looked at the girl with the most striking hair in his classroom and spoke loudly. The smile on Rose's face stiffened upon hearing the new professor's words. With Asterian killing Voldemort, that title was almost never associated with her anymore. And she was more than happy for that to be the case. She hated the fame, especially fame she hadn't earned but rather inherited from her parents, earned with their own lives. Miss Potter, can you tell me the answer to question number 15? Lockhart asked confidently, expecting Rose to surely know the answer. Looking at question number 15 on the sheet, Rose's lips twisted in an unusual manner. 15. What is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday? Answer. How on earth would she know the birthday of someone she had never met? Nevertheless, Rose still responded with a mischievous smile. I don't know, Professor. I didn't meet you until the day of the new student's ceremony. When Rose's voice ceased, silence spread throughout the classroom. Lockhart's bright smile stiffened, unable to believe his eyes. How could someone not know his birthday? Then, there were some stifled laughs. Many students tried their best not to laugh, but it was inevitable, as one couldn't take it anymore. The others followed suit. As they laughed, Lockhart felt his own cheeks burn with embarrassment. That was a funny joke, Miss Potter, Lockhart said with a forced smile, changing the subject quickly. Let's continue the lesson.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.